Chapter 76. The instructors shook their heads, indicating that they did not understand. Thus, someone became interested in the candidate named Ning Kei and took out his 2 test papers from the course of etiquette and the course of calligraphy. The instructor was curious to see if the candidate could enter grade A again, but unexpectedly, he saw 2 big, beautiful, but empty test papers. He could not help but slap the table heavily in annoyance and pass the test papers to everyone to see. He sighed regretfully and said, "Over the years, who has ever seen such a beautiful and neat test paper, and such perfect hairpin-style small regular script? But who has ever seen such an ignorant and incompetent candidate? He must be ranked at the bottom of grade D. I'm so angry." One of the instructors shook his head in appreciation and said with a smile, "Although what he wrote is nonsense, this hairpin-style small regular script is really pleasing to the eye. Just based on this handwriting, he should be promoted to grade." "No way." The instructor, who was the first to feel pity for Ning Kei, said angrily, "A male candidate wrote such beautiful hairpin-style small regular script. His intention is obvious. What does he want to do? He wants to insult the IQs of the Academy instructors and challenge the dignity of the Academy." A simple examination technique was elevated to the height of IQ and dignity. Naturally, the 2 test papers were treated as garbage and placed at the bottom of grade D. At this time, Ning Kei did not know that he had been sentenced to death for calligraphy and etiquette, but he was very clear that he could not get a good score in these 2 subjects. Now that he had given up on music, whether he could pass the Academy entrance examination and become an official student of the Academy, it all depended on whether he could get a high score in archery and driving, and it had to be the highest. Occasionally, horses neighed on the lawn of the Academy. Candidates entered the examination room one by one with their number plates and were randomly matched with military horses. The Tang Empire was a country of martial arts. Unsurprisingly, most of the candidates chose to ride horses instead of driving. The examinees who didn't get their turn stood outside the fence and watched attentively. They watched some examinees gallop elegantly, some examinees fall awkwardly on the grass, splashing mud all over their bodies, and some military horses neighing and jumping. If it weren't for the military captains hurriedly intercepting them, the examinees would probably be kicked and injured. The examinees roughly understood that there was still some element of luck in the driving course exam. If you could randomly pick a docile and healthy warhorse, your chances of passing would naturally be higher. But if you picked a stubborn and bad-tempered warhorse, you'd be lucky if you didn't fall off. Since they were going to be used as mounts for the Academy's entrance exam, the military ministry had done some sorting in advance. Most of the horses looked strong and disciplined. They stood quietly at the side, looking at the green grass under their feet and the peaches and apricots outside the fence. They did not make any inappropriate movements. There was a black stallion on the lawn that attracted the gazes of all the examinees, vigilant, uneasy, and even frightened gazes. 3 examinees had already been thrown off by that violent wild horse. After a female examinee wearing a red outfit was thrown off the lawn, the wild horse actually tried to use its hooves to trample on her. At that time, the scene could be said to be full of danger. The expressions of the candidates who had yet to enter the arena darkened when they saw the tearful female candidate in red being supported outside the barrier. They prayed silently to Haotian, and even asked Buddha to pray that they would not encounter that wild horse. When the results of the random drawing came out, the candidates who were waiting to enter the field finally breathed a sigh of relief. Then, they all cast sincere looks of sympathy on the poor guy. There would always be someone unlucky, and the unlucky one would always be the hero. This was probably the principle of how one could not see the rainbow without experiencing the wind and rain. Under the sympathetic gaze, Ning Kei slowly walked into the lawn surrounded by wooden fences. His expression was very calm, but he was silently cursing in his heart. With the skills he had honed on the grassland, It was naturally easy for him to teach a stubborn wild horse a lesson. However, he was worried that he would not have enough time to train the horse since he wanted to get a high score in the driving course. All the horses on the lawn were equipped with bit, and the black stallion was no exception. But surprisingly, the black stallion leaned against the railing and refused to move no matter how hard the captain pulled it. It stretched its head to the peach tree outside the railing, and with a roll of its tongue, it swallowed a few peaches and chewed them, completely ignoring the inconvenience of having the bit in its mouth. The black horse chewed on the pink peaches and shook its head and tail from time to time. It looked extremely happy, as if it deserved a beating. The captain in charge of looking after the horse wiped the sweat from his forehead and helplessly spread out his hands. He said to Ning Ke with sympathy, "No one knows what's wrong with this horse today. It seems to be a bit infatuated with love. Be careful yourself." After the captain stepped out of the fence, Ning Ke walked to the side of the black horse's neck and reached out his hand to pat its thick neck. The black horse squinted at him impatiently, its eyes full of contempt and dissatisfaction. Ning Ke had hundreds of good methods on how to train a horse, but he had to fight for time. So he pretended not to see the black horse's provocative eyes and said with a smile, "Big black horse, be nice to me." The lad smiled with dimples and looked very innocent. He said in a very innocent tone, "Or I'll kill you." The black horse suddenly became fearful and uneasy. It did not know why a casual threat from the youth next to it had turned it into a pathetic wooden horse. It only felt a very real cold killing intent. The long mane on its neck was ruffled by the wind, its 4 hooves suddenly became stiff, and the pinkish peach blossoms fell from its slightly opened mouth. War horses could not understand human language, but they could understand human nature. Especially war horses that had been on the battlefield for a long time, they could feel the real killing intent and the real danger. Ning Ke killed people at the age of 4, 5, 6, and 16. He killed people from Chang'an to Min Mountain, the city of Wei, the grassland, Shubi Lake, and back to Chang'an. No one knew how much blood had been spilled and how many heads had flown under his knife. The woodchopper of Shubi Lake had run amok on the grassland. Even the most powerful wild horse leader had to surrender to him. Humans might not be able to feel the danger from Ning Ke, but horses could, especially when he said he would kill you. There was a burst of exclamation outside the fence. Whether it was the examinees who were ready to go on the field or the captains who were vigilant to ensure the examinees' safety, they all looked at a corner of the lawn, their eyes full of shock and disbelief. On the other side of the lawn, Ning Ke was leading the big black horse to the starting line. The big black horse, which had been unusually naughty and violent before, was now quiet and obedient like a well-trained handmaiden. Standing on the grassland in the distance, Sang Sang put the big black umbrella under her buttocks and yawned with her hand covering her mouth. Her little face was full of boredom. She was probably the only person in the world who never worried about her young master's life. Chapter 77. In reality, lightning was white. Occasionally there would be purple, but never black. Today, on the lawn outside the academy, everyone saw a black bolt of lightning. The examinees looked at the black horse that was as swift as an arrow, leaping out of the herd of horses in an instant, galloping forward at a terrifying speed that no one could catch up to. They thought of the disheveled examinees who had been thrown off by the horse's hooves, and thought of the red-clothed young lady who had tears on her face as she stood outside the fence, and couldn't help but be shocked speechless. Their eyes subconsciously followed the black lightning and saw Ning Ke, who was sitting on the back of the big black horse, bowing slightly like a falling leaf. They could not understand what this young candidate had done to the naughty black horse to make it so obedient and show such amazing strength. The meadow outside the academy was vast, covering an area of many acres. However, the examination area surrounded by fences was not very large. Everyone was still in shock. It seemed that the girl in red had just raised her right hand to cover her open mouth in surprise when the driving test abruptly ended. To be more precise, the black horse had reached the finish line ahead of the rest of the examinees by nearly half the time with an incredible speed. Ninkei jumped off the horse's back and wiped off a few drops of sweat on his forehead. He turned around and patted the big black horse's thick neck with satisfaction, and then heavily patted its thick buttocks. He waved his hand and left. When the big black horse saw that Ninkei signaled it to leave, it suddenly felt that it had escaped from the horrible blood swamp and returned to the happy human world. It neighed happily and rubbed against Ninkei's shoulder to please him. Then, it hurriedly kicked its hooves and left, not daring to look back. It seemed to be even faster than during the exam. The candidates at the entrance of the fence looked at Ninkei in silence, as if they were looking at a monster. Many people wanted to ask him how he did it, but did not dare to ask because of the strangeness he had shown earlier. Ninkei felt the strange gazes from all around and frowned slightly. He slightly lowered his eyes without looking sideways, and walked directly to the academy entrance exam area. It was not his original intention to attract the attention of the surrounding examinees and even the instructors. Showing off his talent for vanity was also not in line with his ideas. However, he knew that his results in the 3 subjects were a mess. If he did not perform well in the last 2 subjects, he would definitely not be able to pass the entrance exam. He had prepared for years, spent so much money, abandoned his military status, and rushed thousands of miles from the grassland to Chang'an. But in the end, he could not enter the academy. It was really a sad D minor serenade. No matter what, he could not accept such an ending. What was the point of being in the limelight? Just as he was about to leave the driving course, a young girl blocked his way. The young girl had thick eyebrows and bright eyes. She could be considered pretty. She wore a large red robe with a tight belt. Her youthful body was extremely taut and gave off a refreshing feeling. However, the tear stains on her face made her look somewhat delicate and pitiful. "How did you do it?" the red-clothed girl asked angrily. "Why doesn't it listen to me?" Ninkei thought for a while and answered seriously, "Maybe I have a better character?" "Character?" The girl in the arrow robe was stunned and immediately said angrily, "What do you mean?" "I mean luck." Ninkei spread his hands and smiled innocently. Then he politely asked her to step aside and trotted to the driving course examination room. The girl in the arrow robe was stunned. As the daughter of Yunhui General, she was beautiful and straightforward. It could be said that everyone in Chang'an knew her. No one dared to answer her perfunctorily. So when Ninkei ran far away, she came to her senses and turned to look at the back of the lad. She stamped her feet and asked, "Who is this guy?" At this time, a group of examinees surrounded the examination room and were talking about Ninquebec. One of the young men came to the side of the girl in the arrow robe and said, "Someone just looked at the register. This lad is called Ninquebec. He is recommended by the military ministry. He should have no extraordinary background. Miss Situ, you don't have to pay attention to him." The girl in the arrow robe said unhappily, "If he has no extraordinary background, then how could he tame that big black horse? Maybe he is really lucky?" The young man replied awkwardly. Another girl in crimson clothes came over and frowned at the lad on the grassy slope in the distance. She shook her head and said, "He may be recommended by the military ministry from the frontier fortress. It is not strange that he is good at horsemanship. But you all say he has no extraordinary background, but I don't think so. Today, among hundreds of examinees, only he came with a handmaiden, which made Her Highness embarrassed. It is obvious that this lad is too arrogant and spoiled. Maybe he is the son of a big family in Qinghe Prefecture." "Is Qinghe Prefecture great?" "This is not the array of Taizu Emperor." Miss Situ raised her eyebrows and said, "Sister Wutsai, find out the details of that guy. I want to know what is going on." Not far from these noble girls and childs, there were more than a dozen examinees recommended by the military ministry. One of them, who was in his 30s and came from the southwest border, shook his head and said to his companions, This has nothing to do with luck. Since the lad is recommended by the military ministry like us, he must have served in the army at the frontier fortress. He has been close to horses all year round. Naturally, he has a few knives, but he is too young. As if to prove his assertion, an irritated neigh suddenly sounded in the driving course examination room, followed by panicked shouts. The big black horse that was as gentle as a little handmaiden by Ning Kei's side was kicking violently. A burly examinee fell on the lawn in a sorry state, looking extremely embarrassed. Ning Kei did not know what the examinees in the driving examination room were talking about him. If he knew that his military companion praised him for having a few knives, he would probably praise himself silently in his heart. I have 3 knives. In addition to knives, horses, and bows and arrows, the skills he was best at in his life were probably the skills he had honed in order to survive in the forests and grasslands. With only 1 knife and a quiver of arrows, he was confident that he could fight with a cultivator in the lower state of see-through. If he could survive, it would be very easy for him to pass the exam of toxicology. Toxicology was different from driving. There was no need to compare the scores of other examinees to make a judgment. That was why he had tried his best in the driving examination room, trying to get as far away from other examinees as possible. At this time, he drew his bow and aimed at the target 100 steps away, but he did not think too much about it. He only wanted to hit 10 rings with each arrow. If those examinees whose foreheads were drenched in sweat and whose arms were trembling from nervousness while drawing their bows knew that this fellow's minimum requirement was to hit 10 points with each of his arrows, they would probably die from anger. But that was what Ning Kei thought and did. He pulled the bow, placed the arrow, and loosened his fingers. As the bowstring moved, the standard feather arrow of the Tang military would shoot out and accurately hit the bullseye on the target. As soon as the first arrow hit the bullseye, he had already taken out the second arrow from the quiver on his back. He repeated the action of drawing the bow and loosening his fingers. The arrow once again brushed the hard bone ring on his finger and hit the bullseye without any surprise. His movements were not fast, and the target 100 paces away did not show any miraculous scene of a lightning bolt piercing through the target or a back arrow splitting the shaft of the front arrow in half. Just like that, he shot arrow after arrow steadily, but gradually formed a kind of beautiful rhythm, the humming of the bowstring like a soothing melody in the spring wind. Ning Kei's calm demeanor, impeccable posture, rhythmic movement of the bowstring, and extremely accurate archery. As the number of arrows in the quiver decreased, Ning Kei gradually attracted more and more people's attention. More and more people gathered behind him, including candidates, instructors of the academy, and even 2 generals from the military ministry who came for inspection. At this time, in the eyes of the crowd, the lad who stood on the lawn and drew his bow seemed to have turned into a calm soldier who had been on the battlefield for a long time and would not blink even if thousands of cavalry came rushing at him. The general watched Ning Kei shoot the last arrow and said to the attendant beside him, "Find out which general taught this lad. If he can't enter the academy this time, immediately return him to the military." After a short pause, the general rubbed his gray hair and said in a low voice, "Keep it a secret. His original troop will definitely call him back. We, the Yulin Royal Guards, have to steal him." At dusk, His Majesty and Her Majesty had already returned to Chang'an City, leaving only the prince and various department chiefs to preside over the remaining parts. The 6 exams had finally ended and it was time to publish the result. Hundreds of examinees stood quietly on the wide stone platform, tiptoeing and craning their necks to look at the empty screen wall. They were like hundreds of large geese that had been starving for days, stretching their long necks, waiting to be fed by someone. Several instructors of the academy slowly walked out of the building and bowed slightly to the prince. After the officials of the Ministry of Rites confirmed it, the instructors stepped on the wooden table, dragged a bucket of rice milk, and casually pasted a piece of red paper on the screen wall. The sound of waves roared. Hundreds of examinees were like hundreds of big geese who had finally seen their food. They could no longer suppress their emotions and rushed toward the screen wall. Ning Ke held Song Song's cold little hand and was pushed around by the crowd. But in the end, he still managed to fight his way out and squeeze to the bottom of the screen wall. The first thing he saw was the list of etiquette and calligraphy. At the bottom of the paper, he found his name. Ning Ke, the last in the D class. The results of calligraphy were the same. He rubbed his head in annoyance and muttered to himself, "It can't be. Even if I answered blindly, I wrote so many words, and my handwriting is so good. Could it be that the examiner who corrected my paper was a female examiner?" Someone behind him could not help but burst into laughter and ridiculed. "I thought he was a genius like the third young master of the South Jin Kingdom. It turns out that he is just an uneducated man with only martial arts skills." It was the girl in the arrow robe who laughed at him. She was probably unwilling, so when the results were announced, she left her companions and desperately squeezed to Ning Ke's side. She wanted to see what kind of flower this guy would be. Ning Ke did not know that this noble lady of Chang'an was Situilan, the daughter of Yunhui General. He stared at her with great boredom, turned around and squeezed out of the crowd with Song Song's little hand. The girl in the arrow robe turned around in surprise and shouted at his back, "Don't you want to see the results?" Ning Ke did not look back and calmly said, "A+." The girl in the arrow robe and the people around her heard this, and were so shocked that they almost fell to the ground. They thought, where did this guy come from? How could he be so confident and arrogant that he knew he would get A+ without even looking at the result? Sang Sang raised her little face and gave him a puzzled look. Ning Ke looked at her and explained with a smile, "They are not as good as me at pretending to be deep and cool." Chapter 78. Ning Ke squeezed out of the crowd with Sang Sang, but did not leave. He stood at a corner of the academy's stone ground and watched the lively scene by the screen wall. He felt a little remorseful and felt that it was meaningless to deliberately act like that before. He did not know whether it was the big black horse or the arrows that made him feel as if he had returned to the grassland or the Shubi Lake, subconsciously feeling a little nervous. In fact, he did not know whether he could pass the exam or not, so he was very nervous. Today's academy entrance examination gathered many young talents from all over the world. If it were not for the black lightning in the driving exam, Ning Ke, who was dressed in ordinary clothes, would not have attracted much attention. At this time, he was far away from the crowd, so naturally no one cared about him. The examinees' attention was still on their own scores and those who were already quite famous before the academy entrance examination. For example, Wang Ying from Linchuan, who was personally sent back by the instructors of the academy from a remote village. Although he was only 14 years old, his etiquette and literature had caused a sensation in Chang'an a few days ago. Another example was Zhong Dajuan, a gifted scholar from a famous school in Yangguan. However, Wang Ying was still young, and Zhong Dajuan's fame in the southern Tang was due to his poetry. Therefore, most examinees favored the third son of the Xie family from Ruyang in the South Jin Kingdom. The Xie family of the South Jin Kingdom was a 1,000-year-old family, which was famous for its poetry. The third son, Xie Qingyun, was intelligent since childhood. He could write at the age of 3 and write poems at the age of 5. During his growth, he made friends with many famous scholars. The elders in the Xie family appreciated his talent and spared no expense to invite talents from all over the world. Thus, he became famous today. Xie Qingyun was only 18 years old this year, but he was already the Tanhua of the South Jin Kingdom's imperial examination. After the imperial examination, he insisted on quitting his official position in the South Jin Kingdom and traveled thousands of miles north to the Tang Empire in order to enter the academy. Although the academy's enrollment was strict, it would be too unbelievable if the Tanhua of the South Jin Kingdom could not enter. Therefore, no one doubted whether Xie Qingyun could pass the exam, but only cared about whether he could get the first place. At this time, Xie Qingyun, Zhong Dajuan, and Linchuan Wangying were standing under the screen wall, looking up at the list with their hands behind their back. Zhong Dajuan, dressed in a black robe, showed an indifferent expression on his face. He knew that his result in the second course of driving and archery could only be average, and it was impossible for him to win the first place. The 14-year-old Linchuan Wangying's immature face was inevitably a little nervous, but Xie Qingyun, dressed in a starry white robe, was very calm, with a confident smile on his handsome face that matched his talent. The girl in the arrow robe and the girl named Wu Cai, as well as several children of influential families in Chang'an, stood behind them and giggled in low voices. Several hearty girls pointed at Xie Qingyun without any taboo. The crowded crowd consciously left a large empty space around these young men and women, as if they were afraid to disturb or collide with them. The Tang Empire had strict laws, but the distinction between social classes was not too strict. However, the 7 or 8 young men and women standing under the screen wall at this time had extraordinary family backgrounds and their own reputations, so the rest of the people subconsciously kept a distance from them. Soft exclamations of admiration sounded from time to time under the screen wall. Every time the names of the 3 people were found at the top of the list, it would lead to a burst of whispers. Looking at the backs of the 3 talents standing in front of them, they were full of envy. Linchuan Wangying turned back and shyly greeted the candidates with hands folded in front. Except that he only got a C in the course of archery because of his young age, he got an A+ in the course of music. It was said that he played the zither in the course of music in the morning, which won a very high evaluation from Qingyu Fengxing, the instructor of the academy. Zhong Dajuan slightly raised his chin and casually cupped his hands to greet the candidates behind him. He seemed a little proud. However, the Tang people had always been free and easy. As long as you had the right to be proud, you would never be stingy with your own praise. Except that Zhong Dajuan only got a B in the course of riding and archery, the other 4 subjects were all ranked A, especially the course of calligraphy, which also got an A+. Such an excellent result was indeed worthy of applause. The warmest applause and the most enthusiastic eyes of the female candidates were naturally given to Xie Qingyun, the 3rd young master of the Xie family from the South Jin Kingdom. He got 6 A's, including 2 A+ in the course of etiquette and calligraphy. Such a perfect result could be ranked in the top few even in the academy entrance examination in the past 10 years. Xie Qingyun cupped his hands to greet the crowd around him and smiled. The twilight shone on the young talent's white robe and his handsome face and modest smile, which was extremely dazzling. The girl in the arrow robe and her female companions kept clapping their hands and jumping for joy, as if it was also their honor. In the distance, Ning Ke and Sang Sang stood side by side. Looking at the lively scene, he could not help but sneer. I really don't understand why. Is that so-called 3rd young master more beautiful than others? This was just a common saying in the city of Wei. For example, if a soldier drank 2 more bowls of wine than his companions would laugh at him. Why? Is it because you are more beautiful than others? Ning Ke just joked casually, but he did not expect Sang Sang beside him to raise her little face. Her willowy eyes were full of stars after the twilight dispersed. She said, "Indeed very beautiful." Ning Ke was speechless. He looked down at the exposed front of his boots, as if there were ants crawling over it. Under the screen wall, a candidate said excitedly, 6 A's, 2 A's. This should be the best result in the academy entrance examination in the past 10 years. The 3rd young master of the South Jin Kingdom really deserves his reputation. A disappointed candidate replied indignantly, "Who said this is the best result in the past 10 years? 5 years ago, a candidate from West Hill got 6 A's. All the instructors of the academy came out to watch, because it was the best result in 100 years. As soon as this remark came out, the screen wall suddenly quieted down. Xie Qingyun and the other two frowned and looked at the place where the voice came from. How could a candidate get 6 A's in the Academy entrance examination? This statement was really too shocking. The unknown candidate from West Hill who could get the best result in the Academy entrance examination in 100 years was enough to beat all the so-called geniuses in the world to death. Why haven't we heard of that candidate from West Hill? The previous person asked with some unwillingness. The candidate gave him a sneer and said, after that candidate from West Hill completed the Academy entrance examination, he did not take any other assessment and was directly summoned to the second floor by the dean. He should have been studying on the second floor in the past 5 years. Secular mortals like you and me, how could we have heard of him? The candidates under the screen wall exclaimed in unison, guessing who the unknown candidate from West Hill was. First, he got the best result in 100 years, and then he was directly summoned to the second floor in less than a day after he entered the academy. Hearing that the candidate from West Hill had entered the second floor, the third young master of South Jin Kingdom raised his eyebrows higher, and his eyes began to show a dignified look. All those who became famous at a young age always had a bit of arrogance in their hearts. Last year, he got the 3rd place in the South Jin Kingdom, which was unacceptable to him, so he chose to come to the academy to prove himself. Of course, his ultimate goal was the extremely mysterious second floor of the academy in the rumors, but he did not expect that he was much slower than that person. The girl beside the girl in the arrow robe was Jin Wucai, the youngest daughter of the Chancellor of Tang Kingdom. She had a mild temperament since childhood and loved poetry and books. She had long heard of the name of the 3rd young master of South Jin Kingdom. These days, she had met and talked with him in the poetry meeting in Chang, a restaurant, and found that he was indeed very talented. At this moment she looked at his expression and said with a smile, "The 3rd young master has 6 A's and 2 A's, which is also a very rare achievement. At least this time, no one can beat him." That's right. In this year's Academy entrance examination, Zhong Dajuan of Yangguan got A's in calligraphy, Wang Ying of Lin City got A's in music, and the 3rd young master Xie got A's in both subjects. Who can do better than the 3 of you? The candidates on the screen wall all agreed. Xie Qingyun's expression became slightly better, and he laughed at himself and saluted again. The girl in the arrow robe was about to accompany her female companion to talk with the 3rd young master. Suddenly, she thought of one thing. Thinking of the guy's cool declaration when he left, she subconsciously looked up at the top of the screen wall again. She silently thought that the guy must be afraid of losing face, so he talked nonsense. But thinking of the black lightning in the driving course examination, she somehow believed that she would see the guy's name at the top. The name of the guy was not at the top of the course of music. No, his name was not on the whole list of the course of music. It seemed that the guy was really ignorant and incompetent. Lan, you are really a fool, and you actually believe that nonsense. Situilan, the daughter of the Yunhui general, angrily pulled the short hem of her arrow robe. She did not want to continue to search for the name, but her eyes uncontrollably moved to both sides. Oh! She stared at the top of the list of the 3 subjects of mathematics, driving and archery. Looking at the same name, she thought that she was dazzled. Her red lips slightly opened and she subconsciously read, Ning K, the top A's. The top A's. Or the top A's. Following her voice, the congratulatory voices of the examinees below the screen wall gradually became softer. Previously, the examinees would only look for their own names, and then look at the names of those scholars who were already famous. Very few people would pay attention to the nameless people on the roll, so naturally they didn't notice those similar names. 3 A's. Someone looked up at the screen wall in shock and exclaimed aloud. Jin Wucai covered her mouth and was at a loss. Thinking of the words she had heard before, she said inconceivably, "It turns out that what the guy said was true. He knew that he would definitely get A's." Previously, everyone was still praising the third young master of the South Jin Kingdom, who got 2 A's and said that he must be the best in this academy entrance exam. Who could have thought that before the praises stopped, a guy who got 3 A's appeared like this? Who is Ning Ke? Who is Ning Ke? The candidates who had not seen the scene of the black lightning anxiously asked their companions around them. The candidates who had seen the scene began to talk about the legendary scene of the big black horse changing from a fierce wife to a well-behaved servant with relish. Sidhu Ilan was looking around for Ning Ke and found him standing in the distance. She hurriedly took Jin Wucai's hand and pushed the crowd to run over there. Xie Qingyun and the other 2 seemed to be forgotten at this time. He laughed at himself with a touch of indifference flashing in his eyes. He reached out to invite Zhong Dajuan and Wang Ying to go with those noble ladies of Chang'an. The candidates under the screen wall automatically separated to make a path, like a tide, and then gathered together. They followed them to the corner of the stone platform, to the candidate called Ning Ke whom they had never heard before. Ning Ke did not know what happened at the screen wall. He was lowering his head to discuss with Sang Sang what to eat in the shop at night. Suddenly he found a commotion in the crowd, and then the girl in the arrow robe rushed in front of him. Sidhu Ilan stared at him and asked, 3 A's, you, how did you get the A's? Ning Ke was startled. Looking at the growing crowd in front of him, he replied, I reviewed very carefully. Sang Sang looked up at him with her willow-like eyes full of confusion. She thought, young master, do you know what reviewing is? Chapter 79. It was dusk, and the golden light turned the mountain behind the academy into a very high altar. There seemed to be warmth in the cracks of the bluestone stones on the stone platform, urging people to go back. However, the candidates who already knew the results of the academy entrance test did not leave. They surrounded a corner of the stone platform and looked at the seemingly ordinary young candidate. Occasionally, they would pay attention to the little handmaiden beside him and whisper to each other from time to time. The candidates had complicated looks in their eyes. Some were puzzled and some were shocked. There was a candidate who got 3 A+ grades in the academy entrance test and surpassed the third young master of South Jin Kingdom. No one had heard of him before. He was a complete nobody. The young candidate might have been recommended by the military ministry, or he might have honed his skills on the grassland at the frontier fortress. However, he also got an A+ grade in mathematics. Xie Qingyun, Zhong Dajuan, and Wang Ying, the 3 candidates who had high hopes, only got an A grade in this subject. Some candidates who were quick to talk could not help but raise their doubts, and some people immediately responded. Sidhu Ilan tidied up the front robe that she had pulled and frowned at Ningquebec. She asked, "How did you pass the mathematics exam?" Her words were full of doubt and confusion, and her tone was a little tough and defiant. Ning Ke was a little unhappy when he heard it. However, looking at the girl's expression, he was sure that she had no malice. She was just a typical confused girl who was overwhelmed by unexpected news. Therefore, he spread out his hands and smiled innocently without answering. The military ministry had selected more than 70 candidates this year, which had already made many people unhappy in Chang'an City. Now that Ning Ke had overshadowed most of them, seeing that he did not answer, the boys and girls in Chang'an City began to discuss about Sidhu Ilan's question. As candidates recommended by the military ministry, they got the first place in 3 subjects. Of course, those candidates who came from the frontier fortresses and camps of the Tang Empire felt very proud. However, they were older than the other candidates on average, so they behaved and spoke calmly. Although they were on Ning Ke's side, they were not in a hurry to say anything. However, a young master of Chang'an City could not stand it anymore. Chu Yuxian walked to Ning Ke, waving his fan. He put his hand on Ning Ke's shoulder and stared at those candidates. He said, "What's there to be unhappy about? Ning Ke is my friend. Do you know who he is? He was the kind of person who could go to the House of Red Sleeves to drink with prostitutes without having to spend money. Is there anything he can't do in this world? It was said that the most effective way for the young people in Chang to compete with each other was not to compare whose father's position was higher or whose family made more money. For an open and active society like the Tang Empire, social status and wealth accumulation could change drastically at any time. Moreover, it was too vulgar and tasteless. What they valued more was one's talent, reputation, and strength, as well as who was the most popular in Chang'an. Of course, if one wanted to make a living in Chang'an, he could not completely leave his family background. But there were always places where one's family background was not so taboo, such as the House of Red Sleeves and the canteens of various departments. Therefore, it became a place where people competed with each other. Chu Yuxian said that Ning Ke didn't have to pay for drinks at the House of Red Sleeves, which was not an insult, but a real show of support for Ning Quebec. Sure enough, after hearing that Ning Ke could go against the House of Red Sleeves, which no one dared to offend, those young men and women of Chang suddenly changed their expressions and looked at Ning Ke with a sense of awe. Not everyone was shocked by Chu Yuxian's shout. For example, Sang Sang looked up and frowned. She stared at young Master Chu's trembling hand on young Master's shoulder and listened to him talking about young Master's visit to the brothel. She was not in a good mood at all. And Situ Ilan looked at Ning Ke in a weird way. I'm still not convinced. There's only one big question in the math exam. If you're right, you're right, and if you're wrong, you're wrong. The headmaster of the academy has drunk several pots of wine and cut several pounds of plums. It's impossible for him to have several answers. Then why are you A+, while Mr. Xie is only A+? Situ Ilan held Jean Wutsai's little hand and shouted. She was very reluctant. She was not an unruly and unreasonable person, but she knew that her female companion Jean Wutsai admired the third young master of the South Jin Kingdom. At this time, the third young master's limelight was completely overshadowed by Ning Ke, and Jean Wutsai looked a little gloomy, so she could not help but ask a few more questions. In addition, there was a more important reason that she probably did not realize. In the driving course examination, she was thrown to the ground by the big black horse and her face was almost trampled. As the daughter of the Yunhui general, she could not even deal with a horse, which was extremely embarrassing. Then Ning Ke tamed the big black horse so easily and got the only A+ result in the driving course, which was really incomprehensible to her. The A+ result in the math course was even more incomprehensible to her. Since she could not understand it, she was naturally unwilling to accept it. At this moment, an old voice suddenly sounded in the crowd. Because he was the first one to hand in the math exam. Those who can't answer such an idiotic question are even worse than idiots. Then, the grading can only be based on speed. When I was grading the paper, the cinnabar hadn't even melted yet, and he already answered, so he got an A+. Student, please let me pass. An old woman in a blue cloth gown, holding a bamboo broom in her hand, appeared at a corner of the stone ground. She stooped and slowly swept away the dust under the feet of the crowd. Then she slowly walked out. Looking at the back of the old woman disappearing into the depths of the academy, the examinees were stunned and speechless. In fact, at least 4 out of 5 examinees could not answer this math exam, but the old woman said that it was a question that even an idiot could answer. Someone could not help but say angrily, "Who does she think she is?" A teacher in charge outside the crowd coldly replied, "She is the only female honorary professor in the academy. Those among you who are admitted to the academy will be in her hands for the next few years in the math exam." Is she the second professor? Ning Ke looked at the stooped old woman in the distance, trying hard not to laugh in his heart. Xie Qingyun, the third young master of the Xie family in the South Jin Kingdom, had completely calmed down. Although he was young and aggressive, he was still the first in the overall score of the academy entrance exam. Moreover, His goal and vision were not exactly the same as those ordinary examinees. He was more concerned about how to enter the second floor of the academy. The young examinee in front of him should be an ordinary person, so it was very meaningless to argue with him on these things. On the contrary, after hearing the old woman's words, he could not help but secretly admire Ning Ke for getting the answer in such a short time. He earnestly asked, "For the math question, I first used the method of exhaustion, and then came up with an infinite number. Finally, I figured out the reason behind it. I wonder if this is..." Situ Ilan whispered Ning Ke's name in his ear. Xie Qingyun nodded to express his gratitude. He looked at Ning Ke and continued to say, "I wonder how Brother Ning calculated it? Did you use some other algorithm to be so fast? If it was an infinite number at a glance, why did I use exhaustion at the beginning? As for the last answer, in fact, I was too lazy to push it to the end, so I just wrote down the number." Ning Ke's answer was very irresponsible, like Mr. Almost Same. But in fact, he was not talking nonsense. The so-called conversion between the concept of infinity and precise values was nothing more than irresponsible ambiguity. Many people did not understand. Some thought that Ning Ke had hit the jackpot, and some thought that Ning Ke was hiding something. Only Xie Qingyun seemed to understand, but when he was about to ask further, the voice of the instructor of the academy called the roll in the distance. Xie Qingyun, Wang Ying, Ning Ke, Chen Ximiao, He Yingqin report to the Department of Magic Skills. Ning Ke was stunned when he heard his name. Report to the Department of Magic Skills. What did that mean? Why did he feel like he was going to the Department of Worship? Why did he feel cold between his legs? But it seemed that it was not convenient to ask others, so he said a few words to Sang Sang, and then followed Xie Qingyun and others to the depths of the academy. He was a little relieved when he found that there was also a female examinee going to the Department of Magic Skills. None of the examinees on the stone ground showed a look of surprise. In fact, the main reason why they did not go home was that they wanted to hear whether their names would be called in the Department of Magic Skills. They looked at those people going to the depths of the academy with envy. Situ Ilan kicked the bluestone cracks in disappointment, looking at Ning Ke's back and muttering in a low voice, "Why did all the good things go to this guy?" It did not take long for those 7 or 8 examinees to come back from the depths of the academy, as if they had just gone for a stroll. Xie Qingyun looked calm, Wang Ying and other examinees could not hide their joy, and only Ning Ke's face showed no expression at all. The academy set up a special course in addition to the 6 courses to cultivate students with potential for cultivation. In the future, those students would be exposed to the art of sword and talisman, so it was called the Course of Magic Skills. The instructors thought that those students who were called before had potential, and they went to receive a psyche power examination. The reason why Ning Ke was selected was related to the hairpin-style small regular script he left on the ink scroll today and his quick response to the math question. The academy thought that he should have the potential for cultivation, but the instructor who was responsible for the physical examination made a rare failure, and was disappointed to find that his ocean of chi and mountain of snow was blocked. But once again, he experienced the switch between hope and disappointment. If there was no hope, there would be no disappointment. Ning Ke was very clear about his physical condition, so he could face it calmly. Xie Qingyun had already embarked on the road of cultivation when he was in the South Jin Kingdom, so of course there was nothing to be excited about. But Wang Ying and other examinees could hardly suppress their excitement until today when they knew that they might step into the legendary mysterious door. "I can't." Ning Ke spread out his hands and explained to the crowd, "Oh, I can't say I can't. The instructor said that my willpower is fine, but my ocean of chi and mountain of snow is a little weak, and my body is not suitable for cultivation." The academy called 7 people by name, and he was the only one who failed the examination. The examinees on the stone ground looked at him with complicated eyes, and the faint hostility in some eyes turned into sympathy. Of course, there were also a few people whose eyes were full of ridicule. The Tangs respected the strong, but they would not discriminate against the weak. They were tolerant and generous after thousands of years of romance. Situilan, who had been displeased with Ning Ke, looked at him and sighed. She comforted him with sympathy. Don't be too disappointed. After all, there are only a few people who can cultivate. Look at us, we can't do anything. That makes sense, and not being able to cultivate doesn't mean that we are useless. Ning Ke took the water bottle from Sang Sang and drank a mouthful. He looked at her and said with a smile, I am a professional woodcutter. After saying this, the master and the servant walked out of the academy in the twilight. Chapter 80. Situilan opened her eyes wide and stared at the lawn burning like wildfire under the setting sun. She stared at the pair of master and servant who were getting further and further away. She couldn't help but put her hands on her waist and murmured, This guy is really interesting. Ning Ke did not find these things interesting. Arguing with a bunch of kids was just a waste of time and meaningless. What he was thinking now was that according to the curriculum of the academy, there was a lot of free time left for the students. He should use that time to do something meaningful, such as killing people to earn money. Lying on the bed in the old brush pen shop, he looked at the name on the oil paper and asked, Are you ready? Sang Sang was oiling the padao she had just polished. She lowered her head and answered, New cloth covers and old clothes are ready. But young master, what hairstyle are you going to wear this time? Or from the Ueluan kingdom? Ning Ke shook his head and said, You make the decision for such a small matter. Sang Sang raised her head and asked, When are you going to kill him? This guy lives in the eastern city, not far from here. We can kill him whenever we want. Ning Ke looked at the name on the oil paper and the simple information below. He paused and explained, We don't even know when to kill him. When the government investigates the case in the future, it won't be easy to calculate something from the law of time. There is no law in the world. But when you kill more people, there will be a law. Sang Sang sheathed the bright padao in her hand and walked to the bedside to look at Ning Ke's face. She said seriously, This is what you taught me when I was young. No matter how you hide yourself, the government will always find out the reason from the identity of the people you killed. The general's mansion is dead, and the villages in the Yen territory are all slaughtered. Ning Ke smiled and answered, Even if the government finally found out that the killer's purpose was to avenge these two things, how could they find me? Maybe they can't find you, young master. But if the government knows who you want to kill, then they can target and protect your targets. They can even directly use those names as bait. At that time, even if you know those people have people from the government around them, won't you kill them? Ning Ke quietly looked at the little handmaiden's eyes and suddenly laughed. He said, You rarely think so much. I'm not really stupid. I'm just too lazy to think. Sang Sang murmured in a low voice. As for why she was willing to think about these things today, she didn't understand. Maybe she didn't understand. Ning Ke understood. So his eyes became a little warm. He looked at her and smiled. I promise you, I'll take a break after killing 2 or 3 people. Then I'll study in the academy. Sang Sang smiled, and her dark face finally showed a relaxed expression. She said, Yes, the academy is such a good place. Young master, you can meet so many talents of your age. You should cherish it. Ning Ke was not used to Sang Sang's sudden transformation into Shiren. He could not help but roll his eyes. Looking at the roof, he stretched his right hand under the quilt and counted with his fingers. The so-called same age meant that he was actually 7 or 8 years older than them. The next day, the academy officially started classes. Ning Ke and Sang Sang got up early again. After washing and eating, Sang Sang stood at the door of the shop to see them off, while Ning Ke boarded the horse carriage alone. Sang Sang and Ning Ke got up early the next day. After washing and eating, Sang Sang stood at the door of the shop to see them off. Ning Ke boarded the carriage alone. At dawn, the south gate of Chang'an opened. Dozens of carriages with the Academy's logo came out one by one. Judging from the number of carriages, most of the students in the Academy didn't want to go back and forth and chose to live on campus. They hurried south along the willow-shaded official road. Along the way, they saw flowers, fields, and water. When the curtains were lifted, they saw the steep mountain and the meadow and flowering trees at the foot of the mountain. Although it was the second time Ning Ke saw it, he still couldn't help sighing again. It seemed that such a wonderful fairyland could appear in the human world, in the bustling suburbs of Chang'an. More than 10 black horse carriages climbed on the green meadow and soon arrived at the front gate of the academy. The students got off the carriages one after another and greeted each other with cupped hands. In front of the simple stone gate that was not very eye-catching, there were already many residents who had entered the examination room yesterday to welcome them. The quiet courtyard gate suddenly became lively. The young students all wore the academy's cyan robes. The boys wore black headscarves, while the girls used ebony hairpins to tie up their black hair. Together with the green meadow and the simple stone gate, they looked particularly refreshing. Coupled with the youthful vigor on their faces, a youthful aura spread in all directions as they faced the rising sun in the east. Ning Ke tidied up his cyan robe and took out the small bronze mirror that Sang Sang had put in his bag last night. He checked whether the black headscarf on his head was worn crookedly. After confirming it, he got off the carriage. In yesterday's academy exam, apart from Xie Qingyun and the other two from the South Jin Kingdom, the big black horse who had tamed the big black horse was the most conspicuous one. When the students who were exchanging greetings at the gate saw him, they did not avoid him out of jealousy. Instead, they warmly greeted him and exchanged information about recent events and introduced themselves. The bell in the depths of the academy rang quietly. The students stopped talking and went up the steps in the morning light. The corners of their cyan robes were blown by the morning wind, and their headscarves and hair buns were separated gradually, giving them an inexplicable sense of otherworldliness. Ning Ke, who deliberately slowed down his pace and fell behind the crowd, raised his head in the morning sun and looked at the scene in front of him. His heart slightly moved, but he did not speed up his pace. Instead, he looked more and more carefully at the simple main gate of the academy in front of him that looked like 3 stone pillars and the ordinary buildings around the square above the stone step. Yesterday, His Majesty of the Academy came in person and the guards of honor were strict. Moreover, he was busy checking the results of the exam, so he did not carefully look at the Academy. The Academy gave people such a strong sense of otherworldliness, and the half-hidden mountain behind the Academy gave people such a strong sense of oppression. But why did he not find anything special here from yesterday to this morning? A few years ago, Ning Ke did not know what the Academy was. He only knew how to distinguish the smell of animal urine and how to calculate the flight trajectory of feather arrows. It was not until General Ma of the city of Wei registered for him that he began to gradually know something about the Academy, such as its glorious history and countless famous predecessors. He did not know why, but he insisted that the academy in front of him should not be as simple as it looked. It should not be just an educational institution for cultivating talents for the Tang Empire, but should carry a greater meaning. The reason why he had such an understanding was probably related to what he had seen and heard on his journey back from the grassland. Any abandoned disciple of the academy can become a great sword master. Liu Qingchen and Her Highness seemed to be very respectful when they mentioned the academy. But why do the people here look the same as me, and I don't see anything special? He adjusted the black gauze headscarf on his head and muttered to himself. At this time, he had already walked through the main gate of the academy alone, crossed the stone ground, and left the main building. He walked in an alley where the morning light had not yet shone. Not far ahead of the alley was the lively study room, and he could faintly hear the excited voices of the students talking to their friends. However, the alley was very quiet. A voice suddenly sounded in the quiet alley. There is no special place in the world. The Imperial Palace is like this, the Hautian Divine Hall is like this, and so are those unknown places. Then what is special about the Academy? Hearing this voice, Ning Kei's expression did not change, but his right hand in his sleeve suddenly tightened, ready to take the big black umbrella in the cloth sheath behind him at any time. Living in a difficult environment since childhood, he would instinctively judge any sudden situation as dangerous. A scholar appeared in front of the alley without anyone noticing. This scholar had straight eyebrows and wide eyes, with a simple and amiable expression. He wore an old cotton gown that seemed too thick in the spring, and a pair of broken straw shoes. Both the old cotton gown and the broken straw shoes were covered with dust, as if they had not been washed for many years. But somehow, this person looked unusually clean. From the body to the heart, he was incomparably clean. The scholar held a scroll in his right hand, and a wooden dipper was tied to his waist. Ning Kei's gaze moved back and forth between the scroll and the wooden dipper twice, and finally fell on the scholar's face. His right hand in his sleeve gradually loosened. This was the Academy, where no one in the whole world dared to do anything improper here. Moreover, although this scholar was covered with dust, he gave people a feeling of being as clean as a newborn baby. No matter who saw him, they would subconsciously want to be trusted by him, as if everything he said or did should be taken for granted. Ning Kei's body relaxed, but he became extremely nervous, because he felt that he trusted this scholar who had suddenly appeared. For someone like him who had struggled between life and death since he was a child and had decided not to trust anyone for the rest of his life, this kind of unexplainable and irresistible sense of trust was a very terrifying thing. He could not be hostile to this scholar at all. What made him feel even more terrified was that he had a very clear feeling that even if he took out the big black umbrella behind him, there was no way he could pose any threat to the scholar in front of him at all. The scholar in a cotton robe smiled slightly, and his gaze fell on the cloth cover behind Ning Kei, as if he could see what was inside. He patted the wooden dipper at his waist and asked, "The umbrella behind you is not bad, do you want to exchange it?" How does this person know that there is an umbrella in the cloth cover behind me, and a big black umbrella at that? Ning Kei felt that his lips and tongue were parched, and he could not speak at all. After a long silence, he firmly shook his head. The scholar sighed with some regret, and walked past him with the scroll in his hand. He did not look at Ning Kei again, and walked to a remote side door of the Academy. There was a lonely ox cart parked outside the side door of the Academy. The scholar walked to the side of the cart, and very seriously bowed to the carriage, and then sat on the shaft of the cart to pick up the ox whip. An ordinary old man's voice came out from the cart, accompanied by a strong smell of wine. "He doesn't want to exchange with you?" The scholar smiled and shook his head. Then he waved the ox whip, and the ox cart slowly began to move forward. In the spring of the 13th year of Tianqi era, the headmaster of the academy took his eldest disciple on another trip to other countries. He did not know how many pots of wine he would drink on this trip. He would cut a few pounds of plum on a few mountains. Chapter 81. Ning Kei shouldn't feel cold, because the scholar in the cotton robe didn't show any hostility or dangerous aura from head to toe. On the contrary, he was as clean as a lotus and trustworthy as a family member. But he still felt cold, because the scholar could see at a glance that he was carrying an umbrella. The umbrella was big and black, and it was the most important thing to him and Sang, and he wanted to exchange it. The morning sun couldn't shine directly into the alley, so it was a bit cold. Was that why he felt cold? Or could it be that the scholar caused him to trust him for no reason, causing him to feel fear? Ning Kei stood in the alley like an ice sculpture for a long time before he came to his senses. He looked back in confusion but did not see anything. Then he lowered his head and thought about it. He couldn't figure out what had happened, so he decided not to think about it anymore. He shook his head and walked toward the noisy crowd. He didn't know that the legendary headmaster of Academy had already left in a carriage. He didn't know that he had missed a historical moment. He didn't know how he had missed the exchange with the scholar. He didn't know that it was the real first lesson. But even if he knew, he wouldn't exchange what he had for what he didn't have. It was not something he would do. The first lesson in the academy was a big one. The students gathered on the cool stone ground and listened to the lecture of a professor in the academy with longing. They imagined their lives in the next 2 or 3 years. Like the academy entrance exam, the curriculum of the academy was also divided into 6 subjects. 200 students were divided into 6 study rooms. The class time was from morning to noon. It didn't seem long, but there were no breaks in between. The 7 lucky students who entered the course of magic skills had to receive relevant lessons from the academy every afternoon. The rest of the ordinary students were free in the afternoon. They could choose to stay in the academy to study or go back to Chang, to indulge in debauchery. The chief professor gently and sincerely suggested that they stay in the academy and study in the old library. The discipline of the academy was very loose. The bell in the depths was the signal. The first bell was an alarm, the second bell was to enter, the third bell was to leave, and the fourth bell was to leave. The time between entering and leaving was the time for the students to study in the study room. The academy required the students to pay attention during this time. They could ask questions but were forbidden to make noise. As for things like cleaning, the students didn't need to worry about it at all. The imperial court spent a lot of money on the academy every year to hire countless housekeepers and housekeepers. The next step was to divide the classes. The academy adopted the simplest and fairest method of drawing lots, which did not care about the examinee's family background or the results of the academy entrance test. That child Xie Qingyun and Zhong Dajuan were assigned to classroom A, classroom D, and Ning Ke to classroom C. Ning Ke went to the teaching room at the side of the field to retrieve his books and classics. He followed the crowd and stared at the wooden sign on the Yinyu corridor. He found classroom 3's room and looked at the picturesque windows and white walls. He thought about how he would be spending the next few years in this place, and how he had finally stepped onto the Qingyun path of the Tang Empire. He felt a little lost. He took a deep breath to calm himself down and stepped over the high threshold. Ning Ke, sit here. 2 surprised voices sounded in the study room at the same time. Ning Ke looked up in astonishment and saw Chu Yuxian waving to him excitedly in the spacious back row of the study room. His face looked a little pale, while Sidu Ilan was looking at him excitedly in the front row. Today, the girl wore a blue tight suit under the student's robe with several plum blossoms embroidered on the slanted lapel. Her fair neck was exposed under the slightly open collar. It was like a dream, as if it had been a lifetime. It was indeed a lifetime. This was the most familiar and unforgettable scene, for he seemed to see it every year, and more people would ask him to sit there. Ning Ke stood silently in the doorsill of the study room and forcefully closed his eyes to expel those false and disturbing memories from his mind. He smiled apologetically at Situilan, who had an expectant look on her face, and walked to the back row. He did not know that Miss Situ was the daughter of General Yunhui, but he knew that she must be from a noble family in Chang'an. Although all students in the academy were equal, and he heard that His Majesty came to the school in plain clothes and sat side by side with ordinary poor students, he did not know what kind of trouble it would cause if he had too much contact with such a noble lady. Putting down the heavy books and classics, he looked at Chu Yoxian's pale and thin cheeks and stared at his slightly blue lip. He frowned and asked, "Did you go to the House of Red Sleeves again yesterday?" "I stayed there for a whole night." Chu Yuxian sighed and did not hide anything. He said miserably, Ning Ke, there is something wrong with this world. I can't figure it out, so I went crazy in the House of Red Sleeves for a whole night. Ning Ke thought of the scholar he met before, and his body was slightly stiff. He asked, "What's wrong?" "I actually got into the academy. That's the biggest problem in this world." Looking at him, Chu Yuxian was extremely distressed and said, "You know, my old man spent 2,000 taels of silver to buy me the qualification for the academy entrance examination. I just came here to get a wife. Yesterday, I just answered the 6 subjects blindly. When the results were released, I didn't even look at my name. But I actually got B+ in 4 subjects." Ning Ke was shocked and speechless. After a long while, he sincerely praised, "You really don't show your true colors." "Not revealing my face, my ass." Chu Yuxian looked as if his old man had died. He said distractedly, "I answered that the headmaster of the academy was drunk and chewed half a mountain of peach blossoms. But I still got B+. It only means that the instructors of the academy are all crazy." Ning Ke thought for a while and guessed, "Could it be that your family spent money?" Chu Yuxian said angrily, "Who has ever heard that people can study in the academy with money? And that old man only paid 2,000 taels of silver. 2,000 taels of silver is only enough for me to stay in the House of Red Sleeves for 4 months. It's not enough for me to do anything." In the faraway Chang'an city, in the depths of a silver shop in the eastern city, a very fat old man was painfully looking at his family's account book. With tears in his eyes, he sighed and said, 200,000 taels of silver. "My dear son, I've sold most of my family's property, hoping that you'll make a name for yourself. You can't let me down." "Who the hell said that the academy doesn't accept money? Those bastards just don't accept small money." Chu Yuxian didn't know that his old man had made a great gamble in order to let him enter the academy. He was still indignant and felt that the instructors of the academy were all crazy. "I've never liked poetry, reading, writing or shooting since I was a child. So I can't play with those young masters and noble ladies in Chang'an City. Fortunately, you were also assigned to Classroom 3. Otherwise, I really don't know how to spend the next few years," Chu Yuxian said sadly. Ning Ke noticed that when he said that he didn't like poetry, reading, writing or shooting, he didn't feel ashamed at all. Instead, he seemed to take it for granted and even felt a little proud. He smiled and comforted the only acquaintance in Chang'an City, saying, "Since you're already here, just take things as they come. Don't think too much." "You're right." Chu Yuxian looked around at his classmates in the spacious study room. His eyes swept over those slim girls and gradually became happy. "I should get closer to my classmates so that I can get married in the future." Ning Ke was speechless and too ashamed to answer. Chu Yuxian was a typical open-minded Tang person. Otherwise, he wouldn't have invited Ning Ke to drink and play with girls when he first met him in the brothel. After adjusting his mood, he immediately returned to normal. He picked up the jade pendant with 2 fingers and pointed at the girls in front of him, saying in a low voice, "That gentle girl is called Jin Wucai, the youngest daughter of the libationer of Tang. She's docile but not easy to deal with, because the libationer is very serious or grumpy. Don't mess with that tall girl, because her surname is Gao, and she has an uncle who works in the palace. That greasy-haired boy is called Chen Zixian. His family runs a bookstore in the West City. He's quite rich. If you and I want to drink and don't have enough money, we can ask him to go with us. As for the short guy beside him, don't bother with him. I heard that he's a student from Chin State. Except for eating and sleeping, he's reading and shooting arrows. He's so boring." Ning Ke was greatly impressed. He thought that a person who was unwilling to enter the academy only took less than half a day to figure out the backgrounds and temperaments of all the 30 or 40 people in the study room. What a spirit he must have! He must be determined to carry on his career of eating, drinking, and playing to the end, and to seek friends and companions in the academy. Ah, you probably know who the lady in the dress is. Yes, she's Miss Situilan, the daughter of the famous Yunhui general. Chu Yuxian patted the desk and said quickly like a storyteller, Brother Ning, I'm very grateful that you left her and came to me. But I have to remind you that you've probably offended this famous noble lady in Chang'an. Don't say that I didn't remind you. Miss Situilan has been riding a horse on the Vermilion Bird Avenue since she was 8 years old. She and a group of girls of the same age called the Female Army. Over the years, they've shocked many pancake stalls and braised barbecue shops, scared many lecherous men, and kicked many heartless men away. If you offend her, you'll have a hard time in Chang'an. It's just like entering a pancake shop, where there's no delicious fruit. Ning Ke was shocked by the spittle in front of him, and it took him a while to come to himself. He thought that he was not afraid of the female army, and Sidu Ilan was just a harmless little girl in his eyes, so he did not care about it. Instead, he admired Chu Yoxian's ability and said, Next time when we go to the House of Red Sleeves, I don't think we should force Chen Zixian to come with us. You can go there and say a few sentences to earn him back. He thought that his words were very appropriate, but Chu Yuxian squinted at him and said with a faint sneer, In that kind of brothel, you can earn money by saying a few sentences. Who else in the world can do that except you? Ning Ke's expression froze. He wanted to beat this person to vent his anger, but he managed to suppress it. At this time, the teacher in charge of etiquette had walked in with a serious face. The study room suddenly became very quiet, and the young crows and sparrows flew away. Chapter 82. What is etiquette? This is a very broad and grand proposition, but we can't stop exploring and studying it just because it's a grand proposition, because it's very important. This word is as lofty and untouchable as the firmament, so should we stop casting curious gazes at the firmament? Of course not. We observe the clouds and wind during the day, and observe the stars at night. We want to know what the firmament is, and we want to know what's up there. Such a grand proposition needs to be answered in a way that we can understand. Then our answer must be specific, and we must inquire about the subtlety and the specific details. We look up at the starry sky, watch the stars move, and draw the beautiful and constant lines in our hearts. Finally, it becomes the art of stargazing. What is the firmament? We have to experience and comprehend it from the specific lines, the clouds, the upper edge of the breadth between heaven and earth, and the upper limit of the fluctuation of the primordial chi. It's the same for etiquette. If you want to ask me, what kind of answer will you get if you look into the specifics of etiquette and find the nouns in the embodiment? I can only say my own understanding. The so-called etiquette is the rule. The teacher in charge of the etiquette course was an associate professor of the Academy's etiquette department. He was about 60 years old, and he spoke very slowly and clearly. The content of the lecture was also quite organized. The students in front of their desks were listening very carefully. However, Ning Ke was already drowsy. The clearer the instructor spit out the words, the more he felt the drowsiness in his mind, and the more irresistible it was. He was at the bottom of the Academy's etiquette course in the last grade, and he had never been interested in these contents in his previous life. In recent years, he had been busy writing, meditating, killing, arson, gambling, and sleeping. He was really helpless. In a daze, Ning Ke could not help but wonder how painful it would be if his life in the Academy in the next few years was to waste all the good time in the morning on this cliché. What happened next in the study room saved him from this desperate fantasy. He once again understood that the Academy, which had a high status in the Tang Empire, was not an ordinary place, and the teacher in charge here was indeed not an ordinary person. When the old teacher said that etiquette was the rule, a disapproving voice suddenly rang out in the study room. Teacher, the Tang Empire's prestige has conquered the 4 seas, and the Holy Son of Heaven has reigned over the world. Re-establishing the Book of Etiquette does not depend on following the rules. According to the rules of the Academy, Students were allowed to ask questions in class, so it was normal for the student to question him. But it was the first day of school after all, so the atmosphere in the study room suddenly became a bit weird. Ning Ke woke up and asked Chu Yuxian, who was sitting on the desk next to him, "Who is it?" The academy paid particular attention to education without discrimination and teaching students in accordance with their aptitude. Many students who could study in the academy were from ordinary families, but those who dared to question the teacher in the first class must be from an extraordinary family or thought highly of themselves. The student standing beside the desk was the son of a general. The teacher looked at him coldly and asked, "Then in your opinion, can people live in this world without following the rules?" "Not bad." That general, Huzi, said in a low voice, "The Tang Empire was founded on martial arts, and we rely on ignoring those pedantic rules. As long as we are strong, we will always win. But it doesn't mean that we don't follow the rules." The wrinkles on the teacher's face gradually smoothed out. He looked at the burly student expressionlessly and said, "Do you mean that as long as the fist is bigger, the shit is reasonable?" The student scratched his head awkwardly and said, "It's not wrong to interpret it that way. Just like the Tang Empire, when we attacked the Yen Kingdom, we beat them until they cried for their parent. They even wanted to send the crown prince to Chang'an as a hostage. But how would their emperor dare to be rude to the Tang Empire? He should still be called the Holy Son of Heaven." Ning Ke listened to the teacher's words behind the study room and thought that the student's grades in etiquette would definitely not be higher than his. The teacher slowly walked towards the student, his face still expressionless, but when he walked in front of the student, his voice suddenly rose. He raised his right hand that was like a withered tree trunk, and smashed it down on the student's face. He roared angrily, "Does having a bigger fist make sense? Then it's reasonable for me to hit you now." There was a miserable howl in the study room. The burly general's son did not dare to fight back, either because he was afraid of the academy's rules or because he respected his teacher too much. He was beaten black and blue by the old teacher in an instant, and the corner of his mouth was bleeding. He looked extremely miserable. After a long time, the teacher finally stopped. He gasped and stared at the general's son, and said gloomily, "If what you said is right, then it's right for me to hit you now, because my fist is bigger than yours." Since the teacher began to beat the general's son, the study room had long been in a mess. The students stood up in shock, but no one dared to stop the teacher who had entered a state of rage. Until then, Situ Ilan discontentedly said, "Teacher, if you think you can hit him because you are better than him, doesn't that prove his previous point of view?" Ning Ke was still sitting beside the desk, but his mouth was wide open. He never thought that he would see such a hot scene on the first day of entering the academy. At this time, when he heard Situ Ilan's rebuttal, he also felt that it was very reasonable. The teacher looked back at Situ Ilan coldly and said, "I just want to prove his reason. Is there a problem?" Situ Ilan tightly pursed her lips, thinking of the nervous exhortations of her father and brothers before entering the academy, but finally she could not bear it. She made up her mind and trembled and said, "Yes, if you think he is wrong, then you should not use his reason to teach him. Since etiquette is the rule, you should use the rule to bind him and punish him." The teacher sneered and looked at her and said, "General Yunhui has never read a book in his life, but he has taught his daughter well. But as far as I know, although the two generals' mansions have a good relationship, you have no contact with him. This has nothing to do with friendship." Situ Ilan suppressed her shame and anger, looked up and stubbornly said, "I only talk about reason." "Well, I will talk about reason with you." The teacher looked at the students in the study room and said, "No matter General Yunhui or any other general, even if their fists are bigger than mine and their power is stronger than mine, they still dare not to hit me. Why? Because I am the teacher of the academy, and this is the rule of the Tang Empire." Behind the study room, Chu Yuxian whispered timidly, "Why is the academy in a mess?" But Ning Ke, don't be impulsive and provoke this teacher. Of course, Ning Kei did not have the courage to fight alone. Looking at the teacher who was wiping the blood on his hands, he thought silently, "The rules set by the academy are the most important. This has nothing to do with etiquette. It only shows that there is a guy with the biggest fists in the academy. But who is that guy? The headmaster who drinks wine and cuts peach blossoms?" The teacher picked up the book again, looked at Sidhu Ilan who was still unwilling and said, "Whether you are convinced or not, believe it or not, it is not too late to talk about reason with me when you can break the rules of the academy. As for now, my reason is so simple. Etiquette is the rule, and that is my rule. Etiquette is the rule, and that is my rule." What a sonorous, powerful, tyrannical, unreasonable, and insolent declaration! Ning Kei stared at the teacher who was like an old tree trunk, and found that he could not understand what kind of place this academy was, but he liked this damn place more and more. The class ended on time at noon. The teacher of etiquette put an ink scroll under his armpit, blew the long beard on his chin, and walked out of the study room with an extremely arrogant look. The students in the study room were stunned for a moment, and then they all gathered together to talk about the scene in the morning. Sidhu Ilan and others rushed to the beaten student, took out a clean handkerchief with concern, and began to clean the wound on his face. The burly male student's face was full of tears of grievance. "Chu Zhongtian, you are such a good-for-nothing." Sidhu Ilan angrily hit his head and scolded, "If your grandfather saw you like this, he would probably die of anger. You don't know shit, but you dared to talk back to the teacher. It's okay to talk back, but don't you know how to fight back when the teacher hits you? Even if you don't fight back, don't you know how to dodge?" Chu Xiongtu, the general of the 16th Guards of the Tang Empire, had 7 sons and 37 grandsons. Chu Zhongtian was the best among his grandsons, or he would not have been admitted to the academy. But because of his family background, Chu Zhongtian still had a strong martial art. Who would have thought that he would be beaten like a pitiful quail by the teacher? Chu Zhongtian wiped the tears off his face, looked at Sidhu Ilan and complained, "Sister Ilan, you really can't blame me for this. According to my grandfather, if someone wants to beat me, I have to fight back, no matter if it's a prince or a prince. I really wanted to fight back, but I don't know why I couldn't move at all." At this moment, Chu Yoxian's lazy voice came from the study room. Chao Jifeng, the associate professor of etiquette in the academy, graduated from the course of magic skills in the academy in the 7th year of the Tang Empire's Divine Wind. He has been teaching in the academy for more than 30 years, and is a psyche master in the see-through state. Hearing this, everyone in the study room was silent. Sidhu Ilan opened her eyes wide and stamped her feet angrily after a while. She shouted, "Even if he is a psyche master, why does a cultivator bully a kid?" Chu Yuxian walked up and looked at Chu Zhongtian who was badly battered. He sighed and shook his head saying, "You can't argue with him, because Professor Chao Jifeng is from Yen." Ning Kei, who was standing outside the crowd, could not help but shake his head when he heard this answer. He thought to himself, "You really can't argue with him when you mention the great victory of the Tang Empire in front of a Yen, and the crown prince of the Tang Empire was taken hostage and beaten up. The Tang Empire dominated the world, and its people were confident and even arrogant." Ning Kei admitted that he often showed some arrogance when he faced the barbarians on the grassland at the frontier fortress. But today, it seemed that the academy in the south of Chang was inclusive. Not only the students but also the teachers came from foreign countries, so he had to be more careful in the future. Chapter 83. When the bell rang for the 3rd time, the students walked out of their respective study rooms. Some students who lived for a long time hurried to the kitchen so that they would not miss the special meal on the first day of school. Some students who were returning to Chang hurried to the meadow in the academy so that they would not miss the celebration party of their friends in the city. Most of the students packed up their books and followed the quiet alley beside the study rooms to the depths of the academy. Looking up at the signboard, Ning Ke knew that the old library was in that direction. Thinking of the earnest exhortations of the chief professor in the first class this morning, Ning Ke could not help but feel curious. He waved goodbye to Chu Yuxian and followed the crowd to that alley. The distribution of the buildings in the academy was irregular. There were a few areas in the east and a few corridors in the west. They were scattered among the meadow at the foot of the mountain, but it gave people a feeling of nature. There were countless hidden alleys between the study rooms with flat eaves and the corridors. It was quiet and secluded, extending in all directions. If there was no signboard, no one would know where it would lead. Ning Ke seemed to be joking, but deep down, he was not willing to follow the crowd. After a few steps, he deliberately separated himself from the crowd and walked quietly in the alley alone. The noon sun covered his head, casting a neat black shadow on the flat eaves beside the alley. It just happened to press on his right shoulder, which felt a little heavy. He walked quietly like this for a long time before he finally walked out of the alley. In front of him, there was suddenly a bright and open landscape. Ning Ke lifted the headscarf that was blown up by the wind to the back of his neck and looked at the large wetland forest in front of him. Looking at the lush water pines and green bamboos, he did not know that there was such a beautiful scenery in the depths of the academy. There were endless reeds growing in the swamp. At this time, there was no autumn wind to dye them yellow or white. Their upright wastes fluttered in the spring breeze, looking like a dense cornstalk field. The slightly dry wind passed through the forest by the swamp and was filtered by these green stalks that carried water vapor, becoming cool and pleasant again. Ning Ke walked on the stone path beside the wetland, looking at the fish in the shadow in the water and listening to the unknown insects chirping in the woods. His heart, which had been tense for more than 10 years, gradually loosened and softened, as if it was moistened by the water and gently rubbed by the shade of the trees. Occasionally, he passed by a classmate and nodded politely, but did not speed up his pace. The stone slabs under his feet had not been polished, and the uneven surface was just enough to prevent slipping. They were laid out from the alley of the study room, circled around the wetland, and then extended into the forest. About thousands of stones were densely packed together to form a flat road, forming an extremely long stone path. At the end of the path, they arrived in front of an old 3-story wooden building in the green forest at the foot of the mountain. The 3-story wooden building looked ordinary on the outside. It did not have any fancy decorations, nor did it have any curved eaves. It was simply built against the mountain, but the varnished wood should not be ordinary. Looking at the traces left by the wind and rain over the years, no one knew how long it had been standing in the depths of the academy, but there was no sign of decay. Ning Ke looked up at the horizontal plaque above the wooden building, with the words, "Old Library," written on it. He could not help thinking, are the instructors of the academy too lazy? How could a library be called Old Library just because it is old? I know you are all curious as to why this building is called Old Library. In fact, the reason is very simple. This building is responsible for collecting books for the academy, and books are only used to record our thoughts. Once thoughts jump out of the mind and are written on paper, they are no longer fresh, but just old things. Therefore, any book is an old book. There were already many people gathered downstairs. In front of the closed wooden door, a middle-aged instructor of the academy was smiling and explaining to the students the origin of the name Old Library. Now that you are all members of the academy, you must remember that in our academy, there is no such thing as cherishing words and paper, and there is no such rule as kowtowing on the table. Books are books, they are just tools, not sacred. Only our thoughts are fresh. In order to let you remember this building is called Old Library. The students nodded, but not all of them understood the hidden meaning of these two simple sentences. Ning Ke vaguely understood some of it, but he did not know if his understanding was completely correct. Let me tell you the rules of the Old Library. The middle-aged instructor in charge of managing the Old Library smiled and continued, There are a total of 2 instructors and 4 managers here. Our task is to serve all the teachers and students, so we work day and night. You can come and read at any time, but there are 3 things you must remember. First of all, the old library has the richest collection of books in the world. That is because there is an organization of 100 people in charge of searching for books in various countries, and your senior brother Li Jie also spends a lot of money to buy books. They work very hard and spend a lot of money. Therefore, when you read, please wash your hands. When you discuss, please do not spit on the books. You do not need to cherish them too much, but do not treat them as toilet paper in your own toilet. Secondly, it is impossible for us to find more books. Therefore, when you want to read a book but can't find it, please first question yourself whether the book you want to read is worth reading. If it is a novel, is it the most exquisite Hejian novel? If it is a novel about the Eastern Expedition, is it the most representative Big River? If it is not, then don't ask us again, because it means that we have judged the books you want to read to be meaningless. Finally, and most importantly, the old library is strictly prohibited from taking any books out, and copying is prohibited. Don't look at me like that, and don't try to instill any spirit of freedom and sharing in me. The rules of the academy are rules. Professor Chao Jifeng from Class C this morning must have taught you with his fists that the rationality of these rules is not to be questioned. As for the painstaking and earnest intentions behind these rules, you can unconditionally experience them and be inexplicably touched, but don't expect me to explain to you. The instructor stood under the horizontal plaque of the old library, smiling at the students with different expressions. His smile was extremely hateful, like a profiteer giving out loans, or a miser showing off his gold to tempt the poor. He said slowly, "Don't try to challenge the last rule. Even if you are the best book thief in the world, if you want to play tricks in the old library, there will only be one end, and that is death, a very miserable death." The students were in an uproar. Ning Ke stood outside the crowd and shook his head. He thought that even if the old library had the richest collection of books in the world, how could you remember if you were not allowed to copy or borrow? He had other doubts about the collection of books in the old library, but he thought that others would have the same doubts as him, so he suppressed his impatience and waited. As expected, a student raised his arm and asked loudly, "Sir, you said that there are all kinds of books in the old library?" The instructor shifted his gaze and found the student who dared to question him in the crowd. He frowned slightly and said unhappily, "Do you have doubts about what I said?" "I dare not." The student was frightened by the instructor's gaze and trembled slightly. He said, I'm just curious, is there that book about cultivation in the old library?" The instructor's expression became slightly better. He raised his chin and smiled slightly. He was so confident and arrogant that he could be pointed at by thousands of people. He said, "In the eyes of the secular world, the so-called mysterious door books are probably extremely rare, but it is not difficult for the Academy. If you want to read the legendary 7 volumes of tomes of arcane and lank Buddhist scriptures, the old library does not have them. But other than that, I really don't know what other cultivation books you can think of but can't find." Hearing this, Ning Ke, who stood outside the crowd, slowly clenched his fists in his sleeves. Although his expression did not change, his heartbeat sped up for no reason. He subconsciously raised his head and stared at the ordinary 3-story wooden building in front of him. His burning gaze seemed to want to ignite the wooden building. Entering the cultivation world had been his dream since he was young. Although he had been repeatedly defeated yesterday, the reason why the dream was beautiful was precisely because it was difficult to realize. But it also attracted him to try hard, and from time to time, he would show his little tail to tempt him and moan softly, "Come after me, come and catch me." He, who had long since given up hope of entering the cultivation world, suddenly found himself able to enter and exit a wooden building filled with cultivation books. For a young man who had spared no effort in traveling to several markets in the frontier fortress in order to buy a copy of the article on the response of the highest being, this was a sudden and indescribable happiness. Let me remind all of you not to look too greedy. Otherwise, if you really burn the old library down, the headmaster will cut all of us into peach branches and swallow us with wine. The instructor downstairs looked at Ning Kei, who was outside the crowd, with a faint smile. Then he stopped smiling and looked at the students with a serious expression. He said, "I have to warn all of you that the mysterious books that you are curious about cannot be memorized. You can only experience them. As for the reason behind them, I will still not explain it. After all, human strength is limited. If you do not have the potential to cultivate, but still insist on entering the books, it will lead to some very bad result. When that happens, please do not complain that I did not warn you." The wooden door of the old library opened slowly. It was quiet inside, as if it was a door to an unknown world. There was no dust or cobwebs, but it gave people a sense of vicissitudes. The students outside the building were silent for a while. They tidied their clothes and calmed themselves down. Then, they stepped over the threshold and walked in. The inside of the building was much larger than it looked from the outside. There were many simple bookshelves neatly arranged in the spacious space. The bookshelves were arranged according to the 6 subjects and years. On them were all the books that one could think of. They were of different heights, old and new. They were all nestled together, as if countless sages and celebrities were naughtily looking at you side by side. The students quickly dispersed after entering the building, looking for the books that interested them. Ning Kei walked among the bookshelves alone, pulling out a book from time to time to read. Then, he found a writing table by the window of the library. There were writing brushes, ink, paper, and inkstone on the table. He could not help but wonder why these things were prepared if they could not be copied. Ning Kei found a book of Wang Xinglong's regular calligraphy in the South Jin Kingdom library. He took one out and read it as he walked. Gradually it became quieter. He looked up and saw a clean staircase in front of him. The staircase was used to go upstairs. Now that he was on the first floor, above the staircase was the second floor. Chapter 84. Standing at the foot of the stairs, Ning Kei scratched his head and recalled the rules of the old library. It seemed that no student was forbidden to go up to the second floor. While he was hesitating, someone bypassed him and went up the stairs. Hearing the footsteps, Ning Kei felt relieved. He put the regular script of Wang Xinglong in the basket beside the pillar, picked up the front of his robe, and went up the stairs. The second floor of the old library was quieter than the first floor, but there were fewer bookshelves and fewer books. Relatively speaking, the field of vision was wider. When he went upstairs, he found that there were already a lot of people upstairs. They were reading books in front of the bookshelves. Some of them were giggling and some were murmuring. Apparently, they were all very excited. Most of the books on classics and history were on the first floor. The books on the second floor were mainly about martial arts and cultivation. Before entering the building, the instructor had already said that reading was not allowed. However, Ning Kei still felt that it was an unreal dream when he suddenly found a treasure mountain in front of him without any warning or warning. He stood among the bookshelves in a daze and kept silent for a long time before he gradually digested the shock in his heart. Li Jitong talks about Buddhism, the verified relationship between psyche power and emblematic gesture, brief introduction to the 5 states of cultivation, memories of West Hill, Dongxian Sutra, Nanhua Collection, summary of swordsmanship schools in South Jin Kingdom, dictionary of all arts appreciation. Walking in front of the bookshelves, his eyes fell on the densely packed spines of the books. The shock and excitement had long turned into confusion and helplessness. His hands in his sleeves were trembling uncontrollably. He didn't need to take out these books to read. He could guess the contents just by looking at the titles. That year, He had saved up money for a long time and went to Kaiping Market with the grain transportation team in the city of Wei. While looking for a doctor for Sang Sang, he searched all the bookstores in Kaiping Market like a stinky dog. Finally, he found the article on the response of the Tao. He read it for many years until it turned into ashes in a copper basin. That year, he killed 17 horse gangs on Shubi Lake and saved the firewood collecting team in the city of Wei. The general asked him, "What do you want?" "All the soldiers and civilians in the city of Wei can pool their money to find a popular prostitute for you." He held the article on the response of the Tao, which had been read thinly and thickly, and answered, "I want to learn cultivation." The general was speechless. The cultivator beside Min Mountain said that she couldn't do it. The officer in charge of the military ministry's assessment shook his head. Liu Qingchen heaved a long sigh. The teacher of the academy's course of magic skills patted him on the shoulder yesterday. He knew that there was a world in front of him, but he couldn't enter it. He told Sang Sang that it was okay, and that he could make a name for himself with his knife and arrows. But it was really not okay, because he didn't want to see the world in front of him vaguely, but he didn't know what was inside. It was not until he walked into the old library of the academy and went upstairs that he saw these densely packed books. He knew that it would be difficult for him to change the state of his body through these books, but at least he could see what that world looked like. For the past 16 years, he had struggled bitterly with the article on the response of the highest, like a poor child hugging his last potato. Today, he finally saw a vast expanse of paddy field. Even though those paddy fields did not belong to him, he was very excited. Even his eyes became hot and wet. Sang Sang. He touched the spine of the book with his trembling fingers and read silently. At this moment, he just wanted to share his feelings with her. She was probably the only one in the world who could understand his feelings at this moment. The bookshelves were full of cultivation books. He had already determined his goals. Of course, books like Memories of West Hill were not books that he was in a hurry to read. Materials like South Jin Kingdom's swordsmanship school were also not things that he was qualified to study. He was not a person who set his sights too high. He knew very well that he could only start from the most basic things, such as the book in front of him, a preliminary exploration of Snow Mountain and Ocean of Qi. Just as he pulled out the extremely thin book, a muffled sound suddenly came from somewhere in the building. The students beside the bookshelves looked towards the source of the sound and saw a student fall to the ground. His face was as pale as snow, his body was twitching, and white foam was gushing out of the corner of his mouth. He looked extremely terrifying. 4 people in light-colored robes of the academy appeared out of nowhere and walked to the fainted student. They grabbed his hands and feet and exerted force at the same time. They lifted the poor student up like a chicken, and then quickly ran towards the stairs. Their actions were so skillful that it seemed that they had practiced it countless times. The students beside the bookshelves looked at each other and felt an inexplicable fear when they thought of the smiling instructor's warning before entering the old library. However, no one left. On the contrary, more and more students came up from downstairs. They were all young talents from all over the world. Like Ning Kei, they were extremely curious about the mysterious world and had strong confidence that they should be able to enter it. Therefore, they continued to silently lower their heads and took out books from the bookshelves to read silently, pretending that they knew nothing. Another heavy muffled sound of something falling to the ground was heard. Another young student fainted with a pale face. Ning Kei silently looked at the person who was quickly carried away. His heart became heavy and hesitant, but in the end, like the rest of his classmates, he could not resist the temptation of the new world. He made up his mind and opened the thin book in his hand. The first sentence of a preliminary exploration of Snow Mountain and Ocean of Qi was, "Heaven and earth have breath, which is called breath." Ning Kei nervously and attentively looked down the handwriting. Suddenly, he found that the handwriting in his eyes became blurred, as if someone had put a piece of frosted glass between his eyes. He knew that this was probably what the instructor had warned him about outside the building. He gently bit the tip of his tongue to force himself to stay awake and continue reading. Man is the spirit of all things. Therefore, he can understand the way of nature. Willpower is called psyche power. As he read, the handwriting in the thin book became blurred and gradually became a ball of ink stains. He desperately squinted his eyes, trying to make the words in his eyes clearer. Because he was too focused, his eyebrows began to hurt, and the blurred handwriting gradually floated away from the paper. Man's psyche power originates from the brain and converges between the snow mountain and ocean of chi. It condenses into frost, dew, and water. It flows through all the acupoints and disperses outside the body. It resonates with the breath of heaven and earth around the body. One by one, the blurred ink drifted away from the yellowish paper and entered his eyes and mind. It became wave after wave of impact, like a long oar poking into the sea beside a ship, constantly stirring and stirring his brain. Ning Ke did not feel any pain, but found that his body began to shake along with the stirring. His eyes became more and more blurred, and his chest felt stuffy and nauseous, as if he was extremely seasick. With a muffled groan, he forcibly closed the thin book in his hand and gasped a few times. Finally, he got rid of the mysterious dizziness. He took a few deep breaths and gradually recovered his calmness. A middle-aged woman in a professor's robe was sitting at the light table beside the window. Previously, no matter how many students fell down in the building, she seemed not to notice it and just concentrated on her small regular script on the table. However, after hearing the sound of the book being closed, she slightly frowned and looked up at Ning Ke, whose face was pale, with a touch of surprise flashing in her eyes. This female professor had been practicing in the old library for more than 20 years. She did not know how many new students of the academy were lost in books until they could not bear the mental impact and fainted. However, it was extremely rare to see someone like Ning Ke, who had already begun to read and could control his mind with a strong willpower to close the book again. Ning Ke did not know that he had attracted the attention of the female professor. At this time, all his attention was on the thin book in his hand. After he finished regulating his breath, he felt that his spirit and physical strength had returned to normal. Without hesitation, he opened the cover of the thin book again and continued to read. Just now, he saw the two words, mutual affinity, so he continued to read from there. However, this time, when his eyes fell on the two words, he suddenly felt that the two words floated into his mind and stirred up an extremely turbulent sea wave. With a boom, thousands of mountain-like waves came crashing over. The hand and the book in front of him disappeared. He stared blankly at the bookshelf gradually sinking and the densely arranged books in one place. Finally, he saw a snow-white roof, and then darkness, the darkness of the deepest part of the sea. A horse carriage stopped in front of the old brush pen shop on Lin 47th Street. The curtain was lifted and Ning Ke stepped out of the carriage. He bowed to the coachman and the deacon of the academy in the carriage and said very sincerely, "Thank you very much." As the horse carriage drove away, Ning Ke took a deep breath and rubbed his pale cheeks. He walked into the shop and looked at Sang Sang, who threw away the rag in her hand and looked at him with curiosity and hope. Ning Ke forced a smile and said, "The academy is really the best place in the world, but also the worst place in the world." He had fainted in the old library, and did not wake up until the horse carriage was about to enter the Vermilion Bird Gate. He did not remember how he fainted at all. What made him feel more frightened and lost was that he even forgot the content of the book he was reading before he fainted. No matter how hard he tried, there was not a single memory in his mind. But I have to warn you, those mysterious books that you are curious about cannot be memorized. You can only experience them. As for the reason, I will not explain it. After all, human power is limited. If you do not have the potential for cultivation but force yourself into the books, it will lead to some very bad result. Now he finally understood the true meaning of the warning from the academy instructor in front of the old library. He even faintly guessed that those books on cultivation on the bookshelf should be written with some kind of talisman technique. There are many books on cultivation in the old library. I thought that you should be there. Ning Ke looked at Sang Sang and remembered the scene many years ago when he held a weak little girl like a mouse and ran to the bookstall in Limping Market. He said softly, "But it seems to be very troublesome to understand those books. It feels like there is a mountain in front of me. Young master, can't we go around it?" Sang Sang raised her little face and asked with concern. Ning Ke shook his head and looked at her quietly. He asked, "We have discussed before. What if we can't go around a mountain?" Sang Sang nodded hard and said, "Split the mountain." Chapter 85. The next day, the Academy arranged a course of mathematics. However, the atmosphere in the study room today was somewhat different from yesterday. The students beside the desk listened silently to the professor's lecture, but their minds had already drifted elsewhere, to the place called the old library. Obviously, many people had experienced the same situation as Ning Ke yesterday. On the contrary, it aroused the unwillingness of these young students and their will to challenge. As the bell rang, the mathematics professor gently flicked his sleeves and announced the end of the class. The study room burst into an uproar and all the students rushed out, running towards the wooden building deep in the academy. The professor had seen the performance of the new students many times. He just smiled and shook his head without saying anything. Chu Yuxian, who did not go to the old library yesterday, also wanted to explore it today after hearing about the magic of the building from his classmates. He called Ning Ke and rushed out. Ning Ke seemed to be very peaceful today, and was not in a hurry at all. After walking out of the study room, he did not rush to the old library, but walked along the stone path to the kitchen. Ning Ke ate a chicken drumstick and 3 raw eggs for lunch for 2 people. He slowly finished all the food in front of him and looked up at the empty kitchen. He touched his slightly bulging abdomen with satisfaction. Walking out of the kitchen and stepping on the quiet stone path around the wetland reeds, he still did not rush to the old library. Instead, he walked slowly around the wetland lake 3 times until he was sure that the food in his belly had been digested and turned into the heat needed by his body. Then he squatted by the lake and carefully washed his hands before calmly walking in the direction of the old library. He did not have the potential for cultivation, but he had enough fighting experience. In the face of those mysterious books in the old library, he decided to fight with a resolute attitude and cut the mountain in front of him bit by bit. Therefore, he had to adjust his body and spirit to the best state. Make way! Make way! It's not boiling water. It's a living person. In front of the old library, there was a burst of hurried shouts. 4 deacons in school robes rushed out with a fainted student in their hands. Their faces were expressionless, but their shouts were particularly interesting. Probably because too many fainted students had been carried out in the past 2 days, they had to think of some ways to dispel this boring repetition. At least a dozen fainted students were lying outside the old library. The academy had long prepared for this situation, and there were instructors in charge of this matter treating them with refreshment soup and jiuan pills. Looking at this scene, Ning Ke could not help shaking his head with a bitter smile. Walking up the stairs, he found that among the empty bookshelves there were fewer students than yesterday. But most of them were carried out, not because they were afraid of difficulties and did not want to go upstairs. Those who could enter the academy were all capable people, who would be willing to give up on the second day. But looking at those young students' pale faces and swaying bodies as if they were drunk, Ning Ke was afraid that none of them could hold on for too long. From time to time, dull thuds could be heard, like the sound of ripe fruits falling onto the ground in autumn. The students beside the bookshelves kept falling down, either convulsing and fainting, or foaming at the mouth, looking at the sky listlessly. It was a very miserable sight. At this time, Ning-Kei was still holding the book, a preliminary exploration of Snow Mountain and Ocean of Qi, in his hand. He withdrew his eyes from the unfortunate fainted classmates and did not have the time to pay attention to others. He took a deep breath and opened the book with a solemn expression. Heaven and earth have breath, it is called breath. The difficult climbing of the book mountain had to start from the first step, because he only remembered holding this book before he fainted yesterday, but did not remember what he had read and where he had read. He had foreseen in advance how helpless and repetitive the process of reading would be in the future, and every time he began, he would have to start from the first sentence. As expected, the handwriting on the thin book became blurred again. Those clusters of ink stains, like ink drops falling into the clear water urn, quickly dispersed. Ning-Kei was unmoved and continued to read quickly. Man is the spirit of all things, so he can understand the way of nature. The willpower is the psyche power. The blurred handwriting once again drifted away from the paper and began to buzz and vibrate in his mind. Ning-Kei felt that the vibration was not even like paddling, but more like the cold wind on the grassland. He felt that he was fighting with countless fierce horse gangs. He took a deep breath and forcibly raised his head to rest for a moment. Because the movement of raising his head was too firm and tough, his neck muscles were a little dull pain. In order to dispel the annoying feeling in his chest and abdomen at this time, he suppressed the infinite temptation of the thin book in his hand. He looked out of the window at the spring trees and other classmates beside the bookshelves. A small figure leaned against the bookshelf and collapsed weakly. It was Lin Chuan Wang-ing. Then Ning-Kei noticed that in the deepest part of the bookshelf, Xie Qingyun was sitting on the ground with his legs crossed. He slightly lowered his eyes and quietly looked at the scroll on his knees. Although his eyes were still bright, his face was extremely pale. They are all trying hard to climb, Ning-Kei said quietly. He was infected by the young, stubborn and unwilling atmosphere of his classmates in the building. He smiled and cast his eyes back to the paper. The psyche power of man originates from the brain and converges between the snow mountain and the ocean of Qi. It condenses into frost, dew and water. It flows through all the orifices and disperses outside the body. It resonates with the breath of heaven and earth around the body. The mass of ink floated again, shaking and swaying. Suddenly, he couldn't hear the buzzing sound in his mind. He felt as if he was standing in the streets of Spring Breeze Pavilion, without Chao Xiaoshu by his side. There was only endless rain falling from the sky, hitting his face, body, and clothes. He suddenly felt extremely wet and cold. Then he fainted again. On the afternoon of the third day, outside the old library. Make way, it's not boiling water, it's a living person. 4 deacons in school robes carried the fainted Ning-Kei out of the old library quickly and threw him to the doctor waiting outside. Then someone carried him into the carriage. Today, there were 27 people in a coma in the building. On the afternoon of the 4th day, outside the old library. Make way, it's not boiling water, it's a living person. It was still the same 4 deacons in school robes who carried the fainted Ning-Kei out of the old library and threw him to the doctor waiting outside. They wiped the sweat on their foreheads and complained in a low voice. Today, there were 9 people in a coma in the building. On the afternoon of the 5th day, outside the old library. Make way, it's still the living person rolling in the boiling water. It was still the same 4 deacons in school robes who carried the fainted Ning-Kei out of the old library slowly and weakly. The doctor waiting outside the building looked at this familiar face and could not help but sigh. Today there were 4 people in a coma in the building. On the afternoon of the 6th day, outside the old library. Make way. The 4 deacons in school robes simply said 2 words and then threw Ning Ke into the shade outside the building. Spring was coming and the temperature was rising, but the academy students did not make any progress in challenging the old library and gradually failed miserably. In the following days, because of the unforgettable experience, most of the students had confirmed that the books in the old library were completely useless to them, and fewer people went to the 2nd floor. Every day after school, Ning Ke still insisted on going to the kitchen to have a big meal, take 3 laps around the wetland, and then continue to climb the stairs. Every time he climbed the stairs, he fainted and was carried away, but he was not discouraged at all. He did not give up, but his face became paler and paler, his cheeks became thinner and thinner, and his footsteps became more and more unstable. Seeing him go up the tall building and being carried out of the building, there was no accident. On this afternoon, Ning Ke ate 2 big plates of mushroom chicken rice, a plate of shredded pork belly with chili oil, and 2 steamed buns. He washed his hands by the wetland and went outside the old library again. The students of the academy did not remember that Ning Ke had gotten 3 A+ grades in the academy entrance exam. They only knew that this lad was the most famous lunatic in Class C. When he appeared at the entrance of the old library, all the students who were reading or taking notes by the window raised their heads at the same time. They looked at his figure and began to whisper among themselves, "Is this guy crazy? How long will he stay upstairs today? An hour. I think he won't last long. He will be carried down in no more than 10 minutes. I'm more curious about who will go downstairs first, him or Mr. Xie. Mr. Xie has the potential for cultivation, but what about this guy? Why does he work so hard? I think it's because he wants to compete with Mr. Xie for the limelight. Otherwise, why would he work so hard?" Ning Ke did not hear these whispers at all. He looked at the stairs in front of him, clutching his slightly trembling right wrist with his left hand. He forcibly suppressed the strong desire to take back his feet, took a deep breath, and continued to go up. Only he himself knew that the stairs would be steeper, longer, and more difficult than yesterday every day. Looking at his back as he walked up the stairs with great difficulty, looking at his pale face, the gazes of the students downstairs became more and more complicated. Many people doubted his goal of risking his life, or looked down on his obsession, but no matter who it was, they couldn't help but admire the will and perseverance he displayed. On the 2nd floor, Ning Ke gently wiped a few beads of sweat from his forehead and silently walked to the bookshelf where he stood every day. He pulled out the thin book that he had read for many days but still could not remember anything. There was silence on the empty floor. Apart from him, there was only one student who could still persist, Xie Qingyun, who sat at the end of the bookshelf with his legs crossed. His face was as pale as a new paper without ink, with the same book on his knees. Ning Ke knew that Mr. Xie was here. Since he could enter the course of magic skills, he must have the potential for cultivation, so he was not surprised that he could persist for such a long time. But he did not expect what kind of discussion would be caused in the academy when only he and Xie Qingyun were left on the 2nd floor of the old library. In the eyes of many students and even instructors, Ning Ke and Xie Qingyun were competing again after the academy entrance exam. Neither of them was willing to give up before the other, so they came to the old library every day and struggled to persist. Ning Ke did not know this kind of discussion, nor did he know whether Xie Qingyun came here every day because of this competitive idea. Even if he knew these discussions, he would not care at all, because only he knew why he came here every day. Even if it was futile and extremely painful, he still wanted to come here every day. Because he liked it, because he needed it. The reason was so simple. Chapter 86. The thin primary exploration of Snow Mountain and Ocean of Qi was like a mountain pressing on his hand. He took a deep breath and turned his eyes to look out of the window for a long time. When the verdant treetops dyed his tired and dry eyes green, he lowered his head again and continued to read silently. After a while, he raised his head again and looked at the snow-white roof for a rest. In the beginning, when he was reading these magical cultivation books, he could only hold on for a few sentences, but now he could hold on for a longer and longer time. Although he still didn't know what he was reading every day when he returned to Lynn 47th Street, he had a very vague but clear feeling that he was reading more and more every day. The reason why he could hold on for a longer time was not that his resistance to the talisman and ink characters in the books was getting stronger and stronger, but his willpower was getting tougher and tougher in this war. Besides, he was constantly looking for a suitable time combination between rest and reading, looking for all the ways to hold on for a longer time. "You'll die if you keep reading like this." The female professor, who had been writing regular script in small regular script by the window, slowly raised her head and put the elegant pen in her hand on the inkstone. She looked at Ning Kei, who was about to fall, and said in a gentle voice. Ning Kei slowly closed the book, turned around with difficulty, and made a deep bow to the female professor by the window. Xie Qingyun, who was at the end of the bookshelf, also slowly closed the book and politely nodded to the female professor. As the only two students who persisted on this floor, they certainly knew that there was always a female professor sitting by the window. However, it seemed that she was always writing regular script in small regular script. No matter if someone was in a coma or something else, she would never raise her head. So she gradually became a corner of the scenery and a non-existent existence. Today, the female professor finally put down her pen and began to speak. The cultivation books on this floor were all written by grand cultivators with psyche power. In other words, every ink character in these books is the best work of divine talisman masters. Looking at Xie Qingyun sitting cross-legged on the ground, the female professor said, "Both of you have great perseverance, and can even be said to be the most persevering students in the academy in the past 10 years. But you must know that perseverance is useless to see through the supreme products of divine talisman masters. You must have the ability of see-through upper class if you want to enter, break, and understand the book." Then she turned to look at Ning Kei and said with a little pity, "Xie Qingyun has passed the state of perception and is about to enter the no-doubt state, so he can hold on for a longer time. What's more, what he has learned in the building will be good for his cultivation. But your physique is not suitable for cultivation at all. You can only rely on your willpower to hold on here, which will do you no good. It's better to go back early." Ning Kei stood where he was and kept silent for a long time. Suddenly, he bowed deeply to the female professor and asked sincerely, "May I ask if you are at the upper state of see-through?" The female professor shook her head. Ning Kei understood. He smiled gently and continued to ask, "May I ask if you had reached the upper state of see-through when you first entered the academy?" The female professor smiled and understood what he meant. Ning Kei bowed deeply to the ground again and said sincerely, "I want to continue to read for a few more days." The female professor looked at him with appreciation and said, "After all, you still have to act according to your ability. If you are stubborn, don't blame me for stopping you." "Yes, sir." Not long after this conversation, Ning Kei and Xie Qingyun fainted again one after another. The 4 deacons in academy robes had long been accustomed to this, and even knew their weight clearly. They picked them up expressionlessly and went downstairs without saying anything. The dense green of the forest in late spring penetrated through the window to the second floor of the old library. The female professor looked at the spring scenery outside the window and shook her head with a smile. Then she lowered her head and continued to write her regular script. Just then, the instructor of the old library came up from downstairs and came to her. He bowed very respectfully and said, "Teacher, I have one thing that I don't understand." The female professor looked at him and said gently, "I have also found some wonderful things that I don't understand recently. We might as well discuss them together. The instructor of the old library sighed and said, I've been watching these two students for a few days. Xie Qingyun has the foundation of cultivation and extraordinary perseverance. It's not easy for him to stay upstairs for so many days, but it's not rare after all. But Ning Ke is obviously a mortal, so why can he stay for so long? It doesn't make sense. The female professor looked at the ink gradually stained on the tip of the elegant brush and said softly after a moment of silence, I remember many years ago, the teacher once said that if a person's willpower is strong enough, then even God will be afraid. I think this child named Ning Ke is probably such a person with strong willpower. For the next few days, things seemed to be as usual. They attended classes in the morning, had lunch at noon, and went upstairs in the afternoon. Under the gaze of all the students and instructors of the academy, Ning Ke and Xie Qingyun went upstairs one after another and were carried out one after the other. Just when this situation seemed to become a daily scene, there was finally a new change. Ning Ke asked the instructor and found out that he could bring shell-free, oil-free and crumble-free food into the old library. So he brought a few pieces of white bread with him today. However, he was stopped by someone when he was about to enter the old library. How long are you going to be angry? Sidu Ilan held Jin Wucai's little hand and looked at him angrily. Looking at his pale cheeks, she softened her heart and said in a low voice, Now the whole academy knows that you are the most persevering students. Why do you still want to continue? Ning Ke rubbed his sore eyes and looked at her inexplicably, as if he did not understand what she said. In fact, he did not understand. However, this expression was more like some kind of provocation in the eyes of the onlookers. Sidu Ilan said angrily, Look at you now. You have dark circles and a pale face. You will be blown down by the wind, just like that lecher Chu Yuxian. We all know that you can't cultivate like us. In this case, what's the point of you going upstairs? Why do you still have to fight with Xie Qingyun and continue to go upstairs? Chu Yuxian squeezed out of the crowd and held Ning Ke's left arm. He looked at Situ Ilan and raised his eyebrows, saying, Miss Situ, although you are the daughter of Yunhui General, some words can't be said. I am lecherous, but not a ghost. Then he turned to look at Ning Ke's pale cheeks and said with great sincerity and regret, But to be honest, I also advise you not to go upstairs. Why do you have to be angry? Even if you give up now, you, an ordinary person, have fought with the cultivation genius Xie Qingyun until now. Who wouldn't praise you? Ning Ke smiled and looked at the crowd in front of him. He said, I think you really misunderstood. I just want to go upstairs to read. It has nothing to do with being angry or fighting. I think Xie Qingyun also thinks so. You don't know what he thinks. Sidu Ilan looked at him and said seriously, Xie Qingyun only has one purpose to enter the academy, and that is to enter the second floor. If he can't even compete with you, how can he have enough confidence to enter the real second floor? The second floor? Ning Ke frowned slightly and felt that he had heard this saying somewhere. He scratched his head and said, Don't Xie Qingyun and I read books on the second floor every day? You don't even know the second floor? Then why do you work so hard to go upstairs every day? Sidu Ilan opened her eyes wide and looked at him as if she was looking at an immortal. She explained in surprise, The second floor of the academy is not the second floor of the old library. It is a very wonderful place. All the real sages have studied on the second floor. I heard that there are many supermundane sublime beings in it. What does it have to do with upstairs? Ning Ke pointed to the roof blankly. Because the door to the second floor is on the second floor of the old library. Sidu Ilan said grumpily. I know it's a little hard to say, but you only need to know that it is very difficult to enter the second floor of the academy. I heard that only 7 or 8 people have entered in the past 10 years. Since you don't have this idea, why do you want to get involved with Xie Qingyun? Ning Ke looked at her and said with a smile, You mean, in order not to affect Xie cultivation and not to hurt his confidence to enter the second floor, you should ask me to give up voluntarily? As soon as these words were spoken, the surrounding crowd went silent because such a request didn't make sense no matter what, and it seemed to be extremely rude. Jean Wutsai, who had been standing silently beside Situilan, bit her lower lip and broke away from her companion's hand. She walked to Ning Ke and bowed very seriously. She said in a slightly trembling voice, "Student Ning, please help me. Xie Qingyun vomited blood after returning home last night. He really can't hold on anymore." It was the first time that Ning Ke knew that the young man who went upstairs with him every day had paid such a heavy price for this. He fell into silence thinking of his vomiting every night and the concern on Song Song's little face. At this moment, Zhong Dajuan looked at him coldly and said, "Do you need to beg this kind of person in a humble manner? I don't believe that an ordinary person can stay upstairs for so many days." When Qingyun was upstairs crying blood and reading every day, who knows what he was doing upstairs? Maybe he was just resting with his eyes closed. Xie Qingyun was a gifted scholar from the South Jin Kingdom. When he passed through Yangguan, he stayed in Zhong Dajuan's mansion. They were well known and appreciated each other, so they got along very well. Zhong Dajuan had already been extremely angry seeing his friend being forced to go upstairs by Ning Ke every day until he vomited blood last night. Of course, even he himself did not know the real reason that made him say such a malicious speculation was that he was unwilling to let all the Academy's attention be taken away by the soldier from the border town. The malicious speculation seemed to be very consistent with the real situation, so the students looked at Ning Ke in a somewhat complicated way. At this moment, 2 carriages came along the stone path outside the building. Xie Qingyun, whose face was snow-white, was helped to get off the carriage. He stared blankly at this side, but never said a word. Chapter 87. Seeing Xie Qingyun get off, Ning Ke noticed that this man obviously heard the discussion but didn't defend himself. He couldn't help feeling a little disappointed. He shook his head and didn't want to explain anymore. Looking at the crowd, he said, "If you think I'm a villain, then you should persuade Xie Qingyun not to go upstairs. Why do you have to be angry with me?" Seeing that he was not provoked by his words, Zhong Dajuan blocked in front of him with a gloomy face and said, "In any case, don't think about going upstairs again today." Ning Ke was slightly startled and then smiled. He lowered his head and slowly rolled up his sleeves, asking in a gentle voice, "Is the academy owned by your family?" "No." "Is the old library owned by your family?" "Also no." "Then can you beat me?" Then he looked at Zhong Dajuan and said, "Don't forget, I got A+ in archery and driving. If you insist on playing the role of a bad dog, don't blame me for beating you until you can't take care of yourself." Situilan, who was anxious before, could not help but laugh when she heard these strange words. Then she looked at the sad and reproachful expression of her female companion beside her and realized that her laughter was extremely inappropriate. She quickly lowered her head. Jean Wutsai's eyes were slightly wet. She looked at Ning Ke and said, "Zhong Dajuan was just trying to protect his friend. He really shouldn't have said those words. I apologize to you on his behalf. But we really can't go upstairs anymore. What do you think? If you don't go upstairs, we will also persuade Xie Qingyun not to go upstairs again. Then we can consider it a tie." Situ Ilan clapped her hands and praised, "This is a good idea. This is a good idea. It doesn't hurt the harmony at all." Looking at the 2 girls in front of him with a smile, Ning Ke couldn't help but think of some old memories of those fresh junior high school girls who were infatuated with him on campus and those silly girls who kept making plans for their female companions. He understood that these noble girls of Chang and were actually a group of innocent little girls. He said, "I have my reasons for going upstairs, which has nothing to do with fighting. If you really worry about Xie Qingyun's health, I suggest you to persuade him more." Jean Wucai softly sobbed and said, "But Xie Qingyun has his pride. I can't persuade him." Ning Ke looked at her quietly. "I'm just a young soldier from the frontier fortress. I shouldn't have too much pride." "So, instead of persuading him, you came to persuade me?" Jean Wucai raised her head and wiped away the tears on her face with her sleeves. Then, she hurriedly apologized. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. It was a slip of the tongue. Please don't take it to heart." "It doesn't matter." Ning Ke walked past the sobbing girl and went upstairs. He said, "I insist on going upstairs not because of pride, but because of something more important than pride." Situ Ilan looked at his back in astonishment and asked in confusion, "Is there anything more important than pride?" Ning Ke did not answer her. He thought to himself that some things were more important than pride, such as life and death. "Ning Ke, you have to think about the consequences of going upstairs today," Zhong Dajuan said coldly behind him. He had also noticed Xie Qingyun's arrival. Since Xie Qingyun kept silent, he thought he knew what to do, so his voice became harsher. "Haotian has given its people everything. All you need to do is accept it. At this time, there are so many people here. Most of them can't cultivate, but we are not like you who are unwilling to give up and even jealous. I know very well what you want to do. You know you can't enter the second floor, so you use some evil tricks to make Qingyun unable to enter the second floor. But have you ever thought about how sinister and shameful it is to harm others without benefiting yourself?" Hearing the term, second floor, again, Ning Ke finally remembered that Liu Qingchen and the great sword master assassin had mentioned it in the fight at the entrance of Northern Mountain Road. He could not help but stiffen slightly. A mere abandoned disciple of the academy became a great sword master of see-through state after learning on the second floor for a few days. The second floor of the academy. What kind of place was it? His silence and his slightly stiff body gave a wrong signal to the students in the building. They thought that Zhong Dajuan had hit the nail on the head and exposed his intention, so he was embarrassed and in the wrong. Just as the discussion gradually started, Ning Ke slowly turned around at the entrance of the stairs, with a trace of strong sarcasm on his pale and thin face. He looked around at the crowd and said, "I didn't know what kind of shabby place the second floor was before, so I didn't want to enter it. Now that I know what kind of shabby place it is, I will definitely enter it. I hope no one among you will be surprised at that time." Zhong Dajuan was so angry that he laughed coldly and said, "You still don't admit that you are jealous of Mr. Xie?" There were 2 carriages parked outside the old library. One of them sent Xie Qingyun, who vomited blood last night and asked for morning leave, to the front of the building. The other one was an ordinary carriage with indigo curtains, but no one got off and the curtain was still. At this moment, a cold voice suddenly sounded in the carriage with indigo curtains. "I only know that the flowers in the greenhouse will be jealous of the high cliff snow lotus, but I never know that the goshawk in the sky will be jealous of the chickens on the ground." The voice was not so harsh, nor did it carry a strong sense of sarcasm, but it directly made the students inside and outside the old library silent. Zhong Dajuan's expression was extremely ugly, and Xie Qingyun's snow-white face even faintly showed a trace of irrepressible shame and anger. Because the words spoken by the person in the carriage not only raised Xie Qingyun to a very high position, as a snow lotus on the high cliff and a soaring eagle in the sky, but also directly regarded Xie Qingyun, the well-known talent of the aristocratic family in the South Jin Kingdom, as a flower in the greenhouse that had not been weathered by wind and rain, and those chickens pecking on the ground all day long. A simple sentence returned all the previous sarcasm to Ning Ke with countless times of strength. Everyone was shocked and looked at the carriage, wondering who dared to ridicule Zhong Dajuan of Yangguan and Xie Qingyun of the South Jin Kingdom. Just when Zhong Dajuan was ready to ridicule back and some people were ready to speak angrily, the person in the carriage with indigo curtains continued to speak indifferently, aiming at the 2 noble ladies of Chang. and who were inexplicably nervous at the moment. Since his skills and perseverance are not as good as others, then he should sharpen himself well and seek the final victory. How can he let a woman plead for him? Wutsai, you have been a smart and sensitive girl since childhood. How can you become so stupid these years? And Elon, you even helped the people of the South Jin Kingdom to ridicule the Tangs. Where is the strength that you used to ride a horse on the street when you were a child, crying and holding your father to go on an expedition to the South Jin Kingdom? Strength is not proved by ridicule. Our Tang Empire relies on swords and arrows after all. Go back and reflect on yourself. The person first ridiculed Xie Qingyun of the South Jin Kingdom, and then severely reprimanded the two noble ladies of Chang'an. His tone was calm, but there was an irresistible strength in it. Especially after being reprimanded, Situ Ilan and Jin Wutsai did not show any anger, but lowered their heads in shame. The students inside and outside the old library felt that something was wrong and could not help but be curious about who was in the carriage with indigo curtains. The voice in the carriage with indigo curtains sounded again, "Ning Ke, come here." There was dead silence inside and outside the old library, especially when Situ Ilan's cautious eyes confirmed the identity of the woman in the carriage with indigo curtains. They subconsciously bowed to salute. Zhong Dajuan's face became extremely ugly, not because of anger, but because of fear. Although he was born in a big family in Yangguan, as long as the person in the carriage with indigo curtains said something casually, he was afraid that his future career would be terminated. Xie Qingyun's cheeks were whiter than before. Although he was not a Tangs and did not have Zhong Dajuan's worries, as a person of the South Jin Kingdom, how dare he provoke the person in the carriage? According to the etiquette of the Tang Empire, only the Empress Dowager or the Empress could call themselves the Empress. If there was an elder princess in the imperial court, she could also call herself the Empress. But there was no Empress Dowager or elder princess in the Tianqi dynasty, so the only one who could call herself the Empress was the Empress. But it was impossible for the Empress to come to the academy in a carriage, so there was only one possibility. In the Tianqi era, there was a princess who was specially allowed by the imperial court to call herself the princess because of her virtue. In the carriage with indigo curtains sat the most beloved fourth princess of the Tang Empire, the most respected fourth princess of the Tang Empire, and the idol of young men and women of the Tang Empire. Who dared to offend her? Ning Ke was slightly surprised. Under the strange gaze of the students, he walked out of the old library and slowly walked to the carriage with indigo curtains. Only then did he notice that the groom wearing a bamboo hat was Peng Yutao. Peng Yutao smiled and nodded, saying, "Her Highness wants to talk to you." Ning Ke smiled and nodded. He walked to the side of the carriage and bowed slightly, saying calmly, "Your Highness." Liu lifted a corner of the curtain and quietly looked at the lad, whom she had not seen for a long time. She suddenly said, "Since you have entered the academy, you can call yourself a student when you see me from now on." Ning Ke looked at the beautiful and pleasant face through the corner of the curtain. He did not know why he suddenly thought of the bonfire at the entrance of Northern Mountain Road. He smiled and lowered his voice, saying, "Since you are not a teacher of the academy, why should I be your student?" Liu was slightly stunned. She did not expect that this naughty lad would still be so naughty even after she had regained her dignity as a princess. She could not help but slam the curtain heavily and said coldly, "I came to the academy for some business today. I thought that you were studying in the academy, so I came to visit an old friend. I mainly wanted to tell you that I miss Sangsang. Tomorrow, bring her to the princess mansion for me to see." At this time, separated by the cyan curtain, Ning Ke could not see the face of the maidservant, which reminded him of the maidservant at that time. Ning Ke became much calmer and more normal. He bowed respectfully and said softly, "Your Highness is considerate." The curtain was lifted again. Liu quietly looked at his pale cheeks through the gap and slightly frowned. After a moment of silence she said, I heard that you go upstairs every day these days. I advise you to take care of your body. Don't lose your life in a fit of pique. Why do you have to be angry with these people? Saving your life to serve the country is the right way." Ning Ke straightened up and was about to explain, but he did not expect the indigo curtain carriage to leave. Chapter 88. The carriage with the indigo curtain slowly moved away along the stone path by the wetland. The seemingly flat slate was uneven, so the soles of the shoes would not slip easily, but the hard wheels would be violently shaken. In the carriage, Li Yu, the fourth princess of the Tang Empire, was in a daze, holding her chin. She was a little annoyed, so she increasingly felt that Ning Ke was very annoying. She came to the academy today for nothing else but to see Ning Quebec. She wanted to see how the lad who had accompanied her back from the grassland had become. She wanted to know what was so special about the guy who had refused her recruitment, but had followed old Chow from the Spring Breeze Pavilion to kill on a rainy night and caught the attention of Su Chongshan. The most direct reason was that 2 freshmen in the academy had entered the second floor of the old library for more than 10 days in a row. This strange thing had spread out of the academy and reached her ears. When she knew that one of the freshmen was Ning Ke and thought of Liu Qingchen's evaluation, she could no longer suppress her curiosity and decided to come and have a look. At first glance, it was still that ordinary, but childish and clean face. There were still a few freckles and shallow dimples, but his face was much paler than before and looked extremely unhealthy. She did not know why, looking at Ning Ke's pale face and the stubborn and sarcastic expression on his face, she was a little annoyed. If it were not for Zhong Dajuan's sarcasm, which irritated her, perhaps she would not have asked him to come. Ning Ke walked into the old library, and the eyes of the surrounding students were completely different from before. They were full of shock and confusion. Everyone thought silently in their hearts, could it be that the record on the Academy's roster is wrong? This person is not a soldier from the city of Wei, but a disciple of a big family in Qinghe Prefecture as the original legend says? If not, how could the fourth princess know him and even specially summon him to the carriage for a few words? Situ Ilan slightly tilted her head and curiously looked at him, probably also guessing the relationship between him and the princess. Jean Wucai hid half of her body behind Situ Ilan and was a little ashamed to look at him. Princess Li Yu had personally ridiculed Ning Ke, who dared to continue to question him. The embarrassed Zhong Dajuan had hidden somewhere at this time, while Xie Qingyun stood outside the crowd with a pale face, looking a little lonely. Chu Yuxian walked to Ning Ke's side and looked at him in surprise. He said in a low voice, "No wonder Mistress Jian didn't want to take your money. I didn't expect you to have such a strong background. According to the temperament of Situ Ilan and the other girls, even if you bring out the prince today, it may not work. Only the fourth princess can deal with them." Upon hearing this, Ning Ke became interested and asked, "What's the reason?" Chu Yuxian laughed and said, "The reason is simple. The so-called Chang, an army of women, was originally created by the fourth princess when she was bored. Noble ladies like Situ and the others were all brought up by the princess." Ning Ke smiled and did not explain the relationship between him and Princess Li Yu. He did not have the thought of using the tiger's skin to make a coat, but he was willing to make this relationship even more ambiguous. Seeing Ning Ke walking to the second floor, Xie Qingyun finally moved. He slowly walked into the building, ignoring the obstruction of the people around him. He held the railing with his hands, and his body kept shaking, moving up step by step with difficulty. Ning Ke held the thin book, a preliminary exploration of Ocean of Qi and Mountain of Snow, but did not open it. After Xie Qingyun walked past him to the deepest part of the bookshelf and sat down cross-legged as usual, he suddenly said, "You may have your pride, but I also have my own needs. You're the god's favored one, while I'm just a desperado who wants to live. There's a big difference between the two. I suggest you don't lose your life in order to compete with me for a short time. When Xie Qingyun walked past him, he saw the book in Ning Kei's hands tightly closed. He thought that Ning Kei was angry at his previous silence downstairs, so he wanted to continue to gamble with his life. But he did not expect that Ning Kei would say such words. The gifted scholar from the South Jin Kingdom, who had been intelligent since childhood, kept silent for a long time and stared blankly at the pages on his knees. No one knew what he was thinking. Then he stood up with difficulty by holding the wall, made a deep bow, and slowly walked downstairs. The deepest part of the bookshelf was close to the west window, where the sun could be seen in the afternoon. Ning Kei walked there with the thin book and sat down in the warm sunset. He sat down cross-legged on the floor where Xie Qingyun had sat for many days. After closing his eyes for a long time, he gently rubbed his pale and thin cheeks, opened the book with a smile and continued to read. You can make some notes. Although they can't be copied or taken away, they may be helpful. The female professor in a light-colored robe was standing beside the new branches of an old tree by the east window. She did not even raise her head. She was concentrating on her small regular script. If Ning Kei had not confirmed that he had heard her, he would have suspected that she had not spoken. He was slightly startled and stood up. He walked to the table beside the west window and looked at the writing brush, ink, paper, and inkstone on the table. He sat down after thinking for a long time. He picked up the ink block with his fingers and began to grind it in the clear water. The books in the building were strictly forbidden to copy. Even if you wanted to filter the divine talisman characters on those cultivation books in your mind and copy them on the white paper, it was not feasible. Ning Kei tried to meditate. When the fragments of memories flashing through his mind were turned into characters and left on the white paper, the characters in his mind would disperse like smoke and could not appear at all. And according to the rules of the old library, no traces could be left on the book. Ning Kei did not know whether the instructor would find out if he played tricks on the book. But he had never tried to play this kind of trick these days. Countless battles of life and death over the years had long made him understand that in the face of the mountains that had to be crossed, any trick would be very stupid. At that time and place, what you needed was the kind of great wisdom that was close to foolishness. What should I write? In this case, what kind of words could be considered as notes? Ning Kei held the writing brush for a long time, but he could not write anything on the paper. Because he had forgotten what he had read in the thin book before, he did not know what to write on the paper at this time. Maybe these things that I have been doing with my life are meaningless in themselves? He smiled slightly self-mockingly. Thinking of the hard work these days, the painful tossing and turning every night, and sang applying a hot towel to his forehead every night, he inevitably felt a little sad and lost. It was really so difficult for an ordinary person to step into the world of cultivation. No matter how hard you tried, it seemed that failure would only make it more tragic. With a light paw sound, the brush that was full of ink hovered in the air for too long. A drop of ink dripped down and landed on the snow-white paper. The ink quickly spread along the fibers of the paper, blossoming into a ball of irregular beauty. Ning Kei lowered his head and looked at the ink stain. Suddenly, his heart fluttered. The sadness and disappointment in the deepest part of his heart were washed away and turned into absolute calmness. At this moment, he understood everything. Not every love story had a beautiful memory, not every fairy tale had a happy ending, and not all efforts would be rewarded. Even if he tried his best, it was difficult to decide what he would get in the end. Then, he should just enjoy the process. If the writing brush could not write down any profound words, then there was no need to write them down. If he did not know what to write, then he would write something else, such as his mood, his own experience, his feeling in the building, the picture of the quiet female professor by the east window, the old tree with new branches, the sunset by the west window, the momentary afterglow when the candle was cut off, a higher floor, a higher floor. All the previous worries are over now. I was originally a wood-chopping lad by the Shubi Lake. Why should I imitate others to say that the weather is cold? You should know that it is not autumn yet. He picked up the brush and began to write casually on the paper. He didn't have any specific thoughts in mind. He was just writing according to his thoughts at this moment. As the tip of the brush wrote clear and beautiful words on the paper, the feeling of extreme annoyance in his chest seemed to be gradually erased by the brush, disappearing without a trace. I have been in the building for 17 days. I have practiced hard every day, but I could not cultivate the words into my heart. I could only watch them slip away. I have been sober and have fallen into a dark and sweet dream for no reason, but they are always not there. If they are illusory on the paper, why can I see them? If they are real, why can't I remember them? If they exist between reality and illusory, is the ink that wrote them real or illusory? Is the paper that carries them real or illusory? Since he was just casually expressing his mood, Ning Kei suddenly did not want to write anymore. So he put down the brush and looked at the words on the paper quietly. When the paper was dry, he gently put it into the thin book and put the book back on the bookshelf. He turned around and bowed respectfully to the female professor by the east window before walking downstairs. For the first time in many days, he walked downstairs by himself instead of being carried downstairs. The female professor looked up at the young man's somewhat disappointed back and sighed softly. She silently thought of the rule set by her teacher in the old library. Among thousands of trees and thousands of sails, students were only allowed to choose one branch and one wind. Although this student was strong-willed and the psyche power accumulated in meditation was not weak, his snow mountain and ocean of chi acupoints were blocked. In the end, he could only end up vomiting blood and lying in bed weakly. Even if Haotian pitied his tenacity and granted him health, what was the use of watching him like this for another 80 years? The dusk gradually deepened and the night was coming. No one else went up to the second floor. The female professor packed up the ink, paper and inkstone in front of her and walked along a side path in the building toward the back of the mountain. After a long time, the academy and the mountain behind the academy were shrouded in darkness. The academy buildings in the wide meadow were lit up and scattered everywhere like stars in the sky. In the depths of the silent second floor of the old library, a few strands of intricate carvings on the bookshelf against the north wall suddenly brightened for a moment and then slowly slid to the side silently. A fat young student in a dark cyan academy robe squeezed out from the gap, panting. He angrily looked back at the bookshelf and complained, "I don't know who designed this thing. Didn't they know to make the exit bigger? Didn't they think that the academy would also recruit a few fatties?" The fat lad mumbled to the bookshelf and mumbled, "Second brother is a bad guy." He insisted on using the entry-level books as a bet. "Although I, Chun Pippi, am a rare genius, how can I still remember the things I read when I was young?" Talking to himself, he pulled out a thin book from the bookshelf and looked at the words, "A Preliminary Exploration of Ocean of Chi and Mountain of Snow," on the cover. With satisfaction, he gently patted it. As he patted, a very thin white paper flew out. Chapter 89. Looking at the white paper at his feet, the fat lad named Chun Pippi was slightly startled. His eyes, which were as thin as grains of rice, quickly rolled a few times, and his cheeks, which were like steamed buns, squeezed out 2 wrinkles with great difficulty to express his doubts at the moment. Then he thought for a long time and finally made a very difficult decision. He painfully squatted down his fat body, stretched out his short and cute right hand, and struggled to pick up the paper. Then he took a few deep breaths. Being a fat man is really the most pitiful thing in the world. Chun Pippi's smooth and tender thick lips trembled, and then he lowered his head to look at the handwriting on the paper, and subconsciously read out, "A few floors higher, and a few floors higher. All the previous worries are now over. I was originally a wood-chopping lad by the Shubi Lake. Why should I imitate others to say that it's cold? You should know that it's not autumn yet. Being a fat man is not the most pitiful thing in the world, if this fat man is a genius fat man. He pitifully looked at the handwriting on the paper, and guessed that it must be the painful self-narration of a new student of the academy. He shook his head and sympathetically said, "Compared with a genius like me, an ordinary person like you is really pitiful. The world of mortals and geniuses could never be interconnected." Chen Pippi could understand the poor guy's distress and despair, but he did not intend to treat the guy's pain as his own. He casually commented on the poor guy, and then put the thin paper back on the bookshelf. He held the book he wanted, a preliminary exploration of ocean of Qi and mountain of snow, and was ready to leave. Suddenly, he turned around and took out the thin piece of paper again. Looking at the densely packed handwriting on it, his thick eyebrows raised a little on his smooth and plump forehead. He said in surprise, "This guy's handwriting is pretty good." After praising him, he put the paper back on the bookshelf and was ready to leave again. He turned around again, took out the thin paper again, and looked at it carefully for a long time. Then he praised, "It's not bad, it's very good." Chen Pippi found that his behavior at this moment was somewhat abnormal and ridiculous. He opened his mouth slightly and looked at the feelings left by the poor guy on the paper. He muttered to himself, "Could it be that even Master Haotian feels that you are too pitiful, so he wants to use this good writing to persuade me to help a poor person like you?" Sometimes, people just needed an excuse to make a decision, even if it was a made-up excuse. Tonight, Chen Pippi didn't know what he was going to do next would change someone's life in some sense. He just wanted to do something, so he did it. From this point of view, he was indeed more carefree than some poor person. Chen Pippi walked to the desk by the east window and sat down. With the help of the starlight, Chen Pippi looked at the poor man's next words with great interest. His fat fingers tapped on the window from time to time, and there were nocturnal birds singing outside. "I've been in the building for 17 days, and I've been practicing hard every day, but I can't get the words to enter my heart. I can only watch them slip away. I've been awake before, and I've fallen into a dark and sweet dream for no reason, but they're always gone. If they're illusory on paper, why can I see them? If they're real, why can't I remember them? If they exist between reality and illusory, then is the ink that they're written on real or illusory? Is the paper that carries them real or illusory?" After reading these words, Chen Pippi pouted, and his fat face was full of disapproval. He was like a boy who had eaten countless bowls of authentic Zhongshan road hot and dry noodles in West City, and saw a poor guy who didn't know how to stir the improved spicy sauce noodles with a frown. Chen Pippi felt proud and conceited from the bottom of his heart. Chen Pippi grinded the ink under the dim light of the night, and the starlight shone into the ink. He used his fat fingers to grab the delicate and fine brush that his senior sister used to use, and wrote a long explanation on the back of the thin paper. Unlike his fat body, the tiny characters on the paper were actually delicate and meticulous to the extreme. "Poor guy, don't believe in the nonsense of seeing a mountain is not a mountain, but seeing a mountain is still a mountain. If Lord Haotian has nothing to do all day and gives us these questions, wouldn't it be too boring? Of course, the things that exist objectively are real. For example, the handwriting on this book is more real than my pride and conceit at this time. Although the divine talisman master has tampered with the handwriting, you have to believe that it's real. If you can't believe it yourself, then your eyes naturally won't believe it. The handwriting is objective and real, and the paper is also objective and real. But when the paper and the handwriting reflect the spring sunshine outside the window and into your eyes, which are not sure whether big or small, and then it's understood by your brain, which is not sure whether you're smart or muddle-headed. I guess muddle-headed. Then it becomes an illusory existence. The spring sunshine reflected on the paper is already an explanation. When you see it with your eyes, it's another explanation. When you try to understand it, it's another explanation. Explanations are often misunderstandings. The more you explain, the more things will be different from the original appearance. If you still can't understand it, then I have to use the crudest example. The objective reality of things is like a naked beauty, which can only be accepted, and doesn't need to be understood by you and me. Just like that naked beauty, no matter whether her breasts are big or small, whether her buttocks are round or perky, whether the hair under her lower abdomen is thick or thin, it's all objective reality, and you can't change her. But when you look at her lecherously, think how beautiful she is, and want to sleep with her, these thoughts will become pieces of clothes. Every time you think about it and try to understand it, you will put a piece of clothes on her charming and beautiful body, until finally you have forgotten what she looked like at the beginning, and how big her breasts were. How to solve this problem? It's very simple. Remembering the moment when he first saw her naked, no matter if she was the saintess of the Great River Kingdom or Yi Hongyu of the West Hill Divine Palace, he directly went up to her and simply and violently fucked her, regardless of whether she was the saintess of the Great River Kingdom or Yi Hongyu of the West Hill Divine Palace. Women are meant to be fucked. It's not for you to understand. The brush and ink were written directly in his mind. Chen Pippi threw the book on the ground, and his face was full of spirit and satisfaction. He had been regarded as a rare genius since he was a child. However, after many years of learning from the wise and virtuous sages, he could only listen to them obediently, and never had the chance to teach others so unscrupulously. He praised himself. Although the words are vulgar, the truth is not. I only hope that you won't be driven into chi deviation by these words. When the ink was dried by the night wind outside the east window, he proudly stood up and swaggered back to the bookshelf, the fat on his face trembling. He put the paper back into the primary exploration of the ocean of chi and mountain of snow, and didn't care about the bet between him and second brother on the basic teaching materials tonight. Just as he was about to put the thin book back into the recycling shelf, a trace of hesitation flashed across his fat face. He thought that he had seriously violated the rules of the old library by helping the poor guy. However, then he thought of another sentence that the teacher had said, and his eyes that were as small as mung beans rolled, and then he put the book into the recycling shelf, and then swung his sleeves and walked away. Rules are just a fart. Ning Kei set off from the Lin 47th Street every day before dawn, and returned to Chang'an City late at night. Although today was the first time that he had ever walked out of the old library, the night had become extremely dark when the carriage entered the south gate of Chang'an. Chu Yuxian was worried about his health, and specially waited for him to go back to the city today. When the two carriages stopped at the door of the old brush pen shop, the son of a rich family in the eastern city stuck his head out of the second carriage, and looked at Ning Kei, who was walking into the shop. He said with admiration, "Ning Kei, I really didn't expect you to be so open-minded and generous, repaying evil with kindness, elegant and noble." Ning Kei stood at the door of the old brush pen shop, and turned around to look at him with a smile. He said, "Although I'd like to continue listening to you and see how many good words you can think of to compliment me, I have to be honest. I didn't persuade young Master Xie to go downstairs because I was worried about his health. I just liked the place where he sat cross-legged every day, and that place could bask in the sun. You're doing a good deed, but you don't like to be complimented. You have to find a dirty reason." Chu Yuxian scolded him with a smile, and then ordered the servant to drive the carriage away from the Lin 47th Street. Ning Kei smiled and waved his sleeves to drive them away. Then he walked into the shop, took the towel from Sang Sang and covered his face with it. Then he collapsed in the armchair, as if all his bones and strength had been sucked out. Since he started to go upstairs, every night when he returned to the Lin 47th Street, there would be a hot towel to help him recover. Sang Sang calculated the time of his return very accurately, and then soaked the towel with boiling water to ensure that the temperature was good. Under the steaming white towel, Ning Kei's tired voice came out, "I still don't have a good appetite today, so I'll make a bowl of noodles with fried eggs." Sang Sang softly agreed, but did not leave. She stood quietly beside the round chair, and looked at the towel and steam on Ning Kei's face. After a long silence, she suddenly said, "Young master, tomorrow, don't go." Although Ning Kei could still talk with others in the academy, and could even tell a few naughty jokes with Chu Yuxian, only he and Sang Sang knew how much damage he had done to his body and spirit. Every day when he returned to the city from the academy, he was in so much pain and weak that he did not even have the strength to speak. Because of the severe vomiting, he had to use a lot of willpower to swallow his dinner every night. Hearing Sang Sang's voice, Ning Kei looked at the white velvet forest in front of him, and felt the spicy heat and humidity between his mouth and nose. After a long silence, he forced a relaxed smile and said, "I didn't take you out to play in the academy a few days ago, so tomorrow I won't go to the academy." "Oh yes, I met that idiot princess in the academy today, and she wants you to play. Let's go tomorrow." Sang Sang removed the warm towel from his face, and stretched out her small hand to massage between his eyebrows. She smiled shyly and said, "Her Highness wants to see me? I like it too." Ning Kei closed his eyes and felt the annoyance between his eyebrows being driven away by her cold and slender fingertips. He sighed comfortably and said, "Let's take this opportunity to cross off the second name tomorrow." Sang Sang's fingertips on his eyebrows slightly stiffened, and she gently lowered her head to look at her slightly worn embroidered shoes. It seemed that she did not like this matter very much. Chapter 90. Ning Kei decided not to go upstairs to read for a day. Instead, he would take Sang Sang to visit the princess and kill someone along the way. Sang Sang didn't really like this decision. It was not because she didn't like killing people. She had seen Ning Kei kill too many people since she was a child. She didn't feel anything about it. She just didn't like that Ning Kei still refused to rest for a day in such a physical condition. Although the little handmaiden was in a bad mood, the noodles with fried eggs were still delicious. The reason why Ning Kei didn't put pepper or green onions in the noodles was not because of punishment, but because he often felt nauseous and vomited these days. His stomach and intestines couldn't bear the spicy seasonings, so he had to eat something light. After eating the noodles with fried eggs, Ning Kei washed his feet with hot water until they were almost red. Then he comfortably fell onto the bed. Sang Sang washed her little feet with the remaining water, then poured out the foot-washing water and climbed onto the bed. She separated her slender legs and rode on his waist, beginning to massage and soothe his mind. After confirming that he had fallen asleep, Sang Sang gently sighed and raised her right arm to wipe the non-existent sweat on her forehead. She knelt to the other side of the bed, got into her own quilt, and fell asleep with her face against the powder box of Chenjinji Cosmetics store. In the middle of the night, she was awakened by Ning Kei's painful moaning and rolling. She rolled out of the quilt and got out of bed. Stepping on her old shoes, she skillfully used the tip of her toes to pull out the copper basin under the bed. Then she sat beside Ning Kei and patted his back with her small hands, sometimes rubbing him from top to bottom. Ning Kei lay on the bed with a pale face. He stretched half of his body out and kept retching toward the copper basin below. His eyebrows and eyes were twisted together, showing that he was in great pain. The food he had eaten before had passed through his stomach and intestines, so he vomited the 2 cups of hot tea he drank before going to bed, as well as some gastric juices and bile. Since he began to read books in the academy, he had been tortured like this several times every night. It not only made his body weaker, but also made Sang Sang extremely tired during the day. Every time he fell asleep, The ink characters that he read in the old library during the day would turn into a thick, dark monster, emerging from the deepest part of his mind. Wielding spears and swords, the monsters would swell up rapidly and converge into a big ship, constantly surging in his mind. The blue sea was surging with stormy waves, making him extremely dizzy. His chest and abdomen were filled with disgust, and he had a strong urge to vomit. It seemed like a nightmare, but Ning Ke was very clear that it was not a dream. It was just the aftermath of the surging interaction between the characters written by the divine talisman masters on the second floor of the old library and his spiritual world in a mysterious way. Enduring this torture every night, if he could remember those ink characters, it would be a reward for his efforts. However, what made him feel extremely disappointed and even infuriated was that when those ink characters were wreaking havoc in his mind, it was as if he was suffering from aphasia and word recognition disorder. He clearly saw those ink characters appear clearly in front of him, and they looked so familiar, but no matter how he opened his mouth, he could not read them, and he could not recognize what they were. Every day in the old library, he painfully read books that he could not understand, and every night in the old brush pen shop, he felt dizzy and uncomfortable looking at the characters that he could not recognize. It was not just one day, but many days. If it was someone with a slightly weaker willpower, he might have already given up. But for Ning Ke, this kind of inhuman pain and torture was the best opportunity he could find in his 16 years of life. Unless there was no hope in the end, he would never give up. There was a saying that the person who understood you the most was your enemy. This saying was not wrong. In this world, the person who understood General Xiahou the most was definitely Ning Quebec. However, this saying was not complete, because no matter how one thought about it, the person who understood you the most was still you. Ning Ke knew himself very well, so he knew that he would never turn back until he was at the end of his rope. He was not worried that his life would be in danger. The female professor had been sitting quietly by the east window. He knew that if there were no accidents, he would insist on going upstairs and reading until his body became weaker and weaker. Therefore, he had to make the most of his time and cross off as many names as he could from the list. The second name on the oil paper was Chen Zixian, the former deputy general of the Xianwei General. As the most favored princess by the emperor, Li Yu lived in the imperial city all year round, but she also had her own mansion in Chang'an. The next day, Ning Ke and Sang Sang were led to the princess mansion in a secluded place in the southern city. Today, she was wearing a red and black short skirt. The middle skirt was embroidered with beautiful large and strange flowers. Coupled with the deep collar, the skirt had a slightly mountainous feel to it that hung down to the back of her feet, making her look luxurious and extraordinary. "Where is Ning Ke?" Only Sang Sang walked into the back of the princess mansion. Li Yu slightly frowned and looked at the little handmaiden who was brought in by the eunuch. Then she smiled and walked forward to hold Sang Sang's slightly cold hand. She said softly, "I haven't seen you for a long time. You little girl, why don't you come to see me?" The eunuch was slightly surprised and changed the topic. But the eunuch did not dare to neglect and reported with a bitter face, "That guy insists that there is a difference between a man and a woman, and that it is disrespectful to see the princess in private. So he insisted on waiting outside. Now Mr. Peng is talking to him in the duty room." Sang Sang let her hand hold and explained softly with her little face, "Young master has not been feeling well recently." Li Yu slightly lowered her eyes to hide the faint disappointment and anger in the bottom of her eyes. She no longer cared about the mud-like lad and took Sang Sang's little hand to the flat couch. She laughed and said, "I don't know where your mischievous young master got his strength from recently. He runs to the second floor of the old library every day. How can he be feeling well?" "Your Highness, I think the young master is quite amazing." Sang Sang spoke for Ning Ke very seriously. Li Yu shook her head and chuckled. She stretched out her hand and knocked on Song Song's slightly black forehead. She said, "Little girl, you only think about that young master all day long. You don't even think about how he looks like a decent young master." Speaking of this, I feel indignant. Ning Ke really doesn't know how many generations of luck he has accumulated to be able to pick up a capable and diligent girl like you. As they spoke, the two women, one big and one small, bent their knees and sat on the soft couch with their legs crossed. The fate between people was really wonderful. When Liu first saw Sang Sang in the city of Wei, she felt close to her and pitied her for being ordered around by Ning Quebec. On the journey back from the grassland, Liu often talked to her as a maidservant. She really had some affection for her. Since Sang Sang grew up with Ning Ke, she did not have too many concepts of seniority in her mind. She simply felt that Her Highness was a good person and was willing to be close to her. Liu asked Sang Sang about their experiences after they arrived in Chang'an. Sang Sang honestly told her about the trivial matters such as opening a bookstore and taking examinations. Liu was thinking about the relationship between Ning Ke and Chao Xiaoshu. Suddenly, she felt that Song Song's little hand was cold and rough. Looking at her slightly black face, she could not help but feel pity for her. She said, "I will let you get rid of your slave status and stop following Ning Quebec. You can come to my mansion and be a steward. How about that? I don't want you to serve others. You just need to manage the affairs of the mansion for me." In the front yard of the princess mansion, outside the guardhouse near the rockery pool, Pring Yutao frowned and looked at the pale lad on the chair beside him. He could not help but say, "You were so brave at the northern mountain road. Why are you so pale and weak now? What's going on? Did you become a good-for-nothing after studying in the academy for a few days?" Ning Ke smiled and leaned lazily on the bamboo chair to bask in the sun. He looked at him and said, "Your Excellency Pring, you saw the bustle in the old library that day. Now that I think about it, it's still a little mysterious. It's no use mentioning it. By the way, where are those grassland barbarians? And since you and the guardsmen have made contributions, why are you still in the princess mansion? The barbarians brought back by the princess from the grassland have been specially recruited by His Majesty into the Yulin Royal Guards. You know that the Tang Empire has always had such a rule. The Yulin Royal Guards are mostly foreigners. As for us," Pring Yutao smiled and said, "we followed Her Highness to fight and rush back from the grassland. We are really unwilling and worried to leave her side. The palace has the same idea. So although I am now the deputy commander of the Valiant Cavalry Battalion, I mainly follow Her Highness." The deputy commander of the Valiant Cavalry Battalion was a truly important position. Ning Ke congratulated him repeatedly, and then suddenly thought of the fight at Spring Breeze Pavilion that night. He could not help but be slightly startled, thinking that this position was probably vacated that night. Although the palace had tacitly allowed Ping Yutao to still follow Princess Liu, he was after all the deputy commander of the Valiant Cavalry Battalion. Especially recently, the Valiant Cavalry Battalion of the Yulin Royal Guards had been shaken and purged, so he was extremely busy. After chatting with Ning Ke for a while, someone from the battalion said that there was something important to deal with. He apologized to Ning Ke twice and hurried away. Some of the guardsmen and barbarians who followed Princess Liu had now joined the Yulin Royal Guards, and some had returned to the palace. At this time, the guardsmen in the princess mansion basically did not know Ning Quebec. But seeing that Deputy Commander Ping Yutao was so polite to this lad, and knowing that Her Highness had specially summoned him, no one dared to be disrespectful to him. Ning Ke knew why the dignified deputy commander of the Valiant Cavalry Battalion was so polite to him. He had saved everyone's lives at the entrance of Northern Mountain Road, and the Tangs respected heroes very much. Both sides had forged a friendship through fighting on the journey. More importantly, perhaps Pring Yutao had already sensed that the princess had the intention to recruit someone again. This was also the reason why Ning Ke did not enter the back garden of the princess mansion today. Now the focus and goal of his life were on revenge and the academy. He dared not get close to the struggle of the upper class of the empire, and based on a cold guess in the bottom of his heart, he subconsciously wanted to stay away from Her Highness. Although he had been dragged into the struggle of right and wrong after the battle with Cao Shaoshu that rainy night, whether he was willing or not, he was very clearly aware that he was still just a nobody. It was okay to follow Cao Shaoshu to fight in Jianghu at night for the palace, but to jump out of the gutter and directly confront those big powers, a nobody like him could die inexplicably and quietly at any time. Just like the general's mansion that had been destroyed, or like Zhu'er who had closed his eyes under the wall not long ago. Chapter 91. Thinking of these things that he could not fully understand with his IQ and experience, Ning Ke slowly closed his eyes in the sun and began to reconstruct Zhu'er's extremely dark face in his chaotic mind. He strengthened his confidence and sorted out his messy and confused thoughts. The spring sunshine shone on the rockery in the vestibule of the princess mansion, on the bamboo chair, and on his body. The brightness was just right and the warmth was just right. Gradually, the coldness of spring that he had accumulated in the old library was all out. "Are you basking in the sun?" "But Mom doesn't let me." A crisp voice sounded behind the chair. Ning Ke opened his eyes and looked back. He saw a little boy's face peeking out from the rockery. His dark and healthy face was blushing like an apple. His long eyelashes were very beautiful, but his expression was a little timid. Ning Ke looked at the little black face and somehow thought of Zhu'er. He felt a little sad. He stood up from the chair and bowed slightly to the little boy he had not seen for a long time. He said softly, "Greetings, little prince." The timid little boy was Xiaoman, the stepson that Princess Li Yu brought back from the grassland. Ning Ke had a lot of contact with the little boy on the way from the city of Wei to Chang'an, especially after the bloody battle on the northern mountain road. "Why doesn't Her Highness let you bask in the sun?" he asked with a smile. "Mom said it's easy to tan." Xiaoman looked at Ning Ke seriously and explained, "I'm Mom's son, the grandson recognized by His Majesty, and the proudest noble of the Tang Empire. So I can tan, but not too much." Ning Ke could not help scratching his head when he heard the little boy's answer. He could imagine the discomfort of a child from the grassland after coming to the rich and prosperous Chang'an city. He just did not expect that the princess would love and educate the little prince so strictly. He explained with a smile, "It's good to bask in the sun occasionally." It was quiet in the vestibule. The little boy looked around and found that the teaching nannies and palace maids did not notice that he had sneaked out. His little face lit up and he jumped to the bamboo chair. He pulled Ning Ke's sleeve and looked at him with expectant eyes. He said, "Can you tell me a story?" Ning Ke was stunned. He didn't expect the little boy to recognize him, and he didn't expect him to still remember the fairy tales by the fire. Looking at the little boy's expectant eyes and the quiet vestibule, she thought about how she had nothing else to do but bask in the sun, so she smiled and sat back on the bamboo chair. She gestured for the little boy to sit beside her and said, "I don't know how to tell stories. The ones I told you last time should be called fairy tales." "What's the difference between fairy tales and stories?" Buchi asked curiously. Ning Ke replied, "The story is very complicated, but the fairy tale is very simple, and very happy." Xiaoman laughed happily and said, "Then I want to listen to fairy tales." Ning Ke recalled some scenes from the past, and could not help but smile. He said, "This happens to be what I'm best at." Xiaoman moved her body closer to him, and prepared to listen attentively. Ning Ke thought for a moment, looked at him and said, "You are a little prince on the grassland. Then I will tell you a fairy tale about a little prince, okay?" Xiaoman said excitedly, Okay, okay. Ning Ke lay on the bamboo chair and looked at the sky. He said, "There are pythons in the forest. They are very big. After they catch their prey, they don't need to chew it. They just swallow it directly and then sleep for 6 months, using this time to digest the food in their stomach." Xiao Man opened his eyes wide and said in horror, "That's terrible. Don't they say that fairy tales are all happy?" Ning Ke glared at him and thought that he was not as obedient as Sang Sang used to be. He said, "It's just the beginning. Don't worry. When I heard this story, I was more interested in the things in the forest, so I drew a picture according to my imagination. It was a big python swallowing a big beast. I showed the picture to other adults and asked them if they were scared. They said, 'What's so scary about a hat?'" Xiao Man clapped his hands excitedly and said, "I see. You drew the snake as the edge of the hat and the big beast as the middle of the hat. Is your picture not good?" Ning Ke was speechless and continued, "I didn't draw a hat. It was a snake swallowing a beast. Those adults, like you, couldn't understand it at all. So I just drew the situation inside the python's stomach." Xiao Man looked at him in confusion and asked, "Isn't it a fairy tale about the little prince? Where is the little prince?" "He will be out soon," Ning Ke explained. "He will be out in a little while." It didn't take long for the teaching nannies and palace maids of the princess's mansion to find the vestibule. At this time, the princess also finished catching up with Sang Sang. Ning Ke took the little handmaiden's hand and ran away under the suspicious and resentful eyes of the nannies and palace maids. They finished their visit to the princess's mansion as quickly as possible. Walking on the quiet streets of Southern City, the big black umbrella tightly wrapped in coarse cloth kept patting Song Song's thigh. The master and handmaiden walked quietly for a while. Suddenly, Sang Sang said something out of the blue, "The princess is a good person." Ning Ke looked up at the sky above the street that was separated by the sycamore trees. He looked at the clouds that were getting darker and darker and said, "It looks like it's going to rain." Sang Sang wanted to say something, but Ning Ke didn't want to say those things. So the former said something out of the blue, while the latter looked up at the sky and said it was going to rain. Sang Sang stopped and looked up at him. She asked, "Young master, why don't you like her?" Ning Ke felt that it was necessary to let the little handmaiden know his true thoughts. He hesitated for a moment and said, "Because I don't think she is a good person in the traditional sense, although she is really good to you." For some reason, Sang Sang showed a rare stubbornness on this issue. She said seriously, "If Her Highness is not a good person, then why did she go to the grassland? Why is she so good to Xiao Man?" Ning Ke looked at her quietly and suddenly said, "If she is a good person, then why did she go to the grassland? Why is she so good to Xiao Man? I don't think that all stepmothers in the world are bad people, but I have never seen any stepmother like her who regards Xiao Man as more important than her own life." The same two questions could prove that Her Highness was a good person in Song Song's eyes, but it became the opposite in Ning Ke's eyes. She didn't understand what he was trying to say and looked at him in confusion. At this moment, rain gently floated down from the sky of Chang and in the deep spring. Ning Ke untied the big black umbrella from her back and opened it. He continued to walk forward and said, "There must be something wrong when things are abnormal. Her Highness's stepmother is still so young. Is she overflowing with maternal instinct? In my opinion, it's too early. I think it's empathy. She transferred her feelings for the Chanyu to the little boy. In this case, she seems to have a lot of apologies for the Chanyu who sleeps on the grassland. Only we, the border army, know how great the Chanyu was. But such a great figure was so inexplicably murdered by his idiot younger brother and usurped the throne? Young master, what are you trying to say?" "What I want to say is that Her Highness will probably regret it for the rest of her life. Because Chanyu should really love her, and he is the only man in the world who dares to really love her." "I don't understand." "Nothing." After a long silence, Sang Sang suddenly said, Do you think Her Highness killed Chanyu? Ning Ke didn't answer her directly, but said, It seems that your usual stupidity is indeed an act of laziness. Sang Sang lowered her head and walked under the black umbrella. She slightly clenched her small fists and said, Where's the evidence? There are many things in this world that don't need evidence. Ning Ke looked at the drizzle falling outside the umbrella and said, When she went to the grassland, she could not only defuse the attacks of some swindlers in the Empire, but also gain His Majesty's pity by showing weakness in the battle with Her Majesty. She could also win the respect of the Tang people and even develop her own power on the grassland. But she couldn't stay on the grassland forever. His Majesty is getting older, and the successor has to be decided as soon as possible. So she needs to come back. As the woman Chanyu loved, there is only one way for her to come back. Sang Sang lowered her head and whispered, but Her Highness was only 12 or 13 when she decided to marry to the grassland. I started killing horse gang when I was 12 or 13. A person's ability is not necessarily proportional to his age. Ning Ke held the big black umbrella and gradually quickened his pace. He shook his head and said, What I said just now was that Her Highness had a reason to do that and could benefit from it. But in my opinion, the most convincing thing is what I said before. We all know how great the young Chanyu was. Such a great man is hard to be framed and killed, unless the killer is the one he trusted and loved most. Sang Sang lowered her head and pursed her thin lips. She whispered, Anyway, it's all your guess, young master. Ning Ke said, I also hope that my guess is wrong. I also hope that the world is full of fairy tales, where the prince and the princess live happily ever after. But you see, the prince on the grassland is dead, and the princess comes home. Sang Sang raised her head, and a drop of rain slid down her dark cheek. She looked at him and asked angrily, Young master, why is the world in your eyes always so dark? Ning Ke stopped and looked at her silently. After a long time, he said coldly, Because the world I saw was so dark from the moment I survived to the moment I found you in the pile of corpses by the roadside. After saying this, he also felt that he had lost his composure. He strode to the front of the street in embarrassment. He didn't know whether it was the shadow cast on his spirit by the old library of the academy, or because he was about to kill someone, but he always felt that the rain outside the big black umbrella was not so refreshing and seemed a little gloomy. Sang Sang stood in the rain and looked at his back. Suddenly she quickened her pace and caught up with him. She caught up to the big black umbrella and the guy, and then reached up to grab the corner of the sleeve of his right hand that was holding the umbrella and never let go again. The conversation between the master and the handmaiden could be heard from time to time under the big black umbrella. I thought you were going to scold Her Highness as an idiot again. Don't be emotional about anything. You will only hurt others and yourself in the end. So she is indeed an idiot. Then why didn't you scold her just now? I will scold her less in the future, because those emotional idiots are all poor people. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.